How are you feeling? How long have you been here?
3 months, May 17th.
And what brought you?
That's difficult to answer.
Eventually resulted in your being here in the hospital.
That's difficult to answer.
is the end. There's a noise inside my head of crying people facing death. Is this the end? Is this the end? I'm burning in the stone. There's no place to hide. I'm burning in the stone. This is the final time. What have we done to the world? What have we done to the world? I'm burning in the stone. There's no place to hide. I'm burning in the stone. This is the final
Und weil der Mensch ein Mensch ist, drum braucht er was zum Essen, bitte sehr. Es macht ihn ein Geschwätz nicht satt, das schafft kein Essen her. Drum links, zwei, drei, drum links, zwei, drei, wo dein Platz genossen ist, weil ich ein in die Arbeit einweist und weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist. Und weil der Mensch ein Mensch ist, drum hat der Stiefel im Gesicht nicht gern. Er will unter sich keinen Sklaven sehen und über sich keinen Herrn. Drum links, zwei, drei, drum links, zwei, drei, und ein Platz genossen ist, weil ich ein in die Arbeiter einweist und weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist. Und weil der Prolet ein Prolet ist, drum wird ihn kein anderer befreien. Es kann die Befreiung der Arbeiter nur das Werk der Arbeiter sein. Drum links, zwei, drei, drum links, zwei, drei, und ein Platz genossen ist, weil ich ein in die Arbeiter einweist und weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Здравствуйте, comrades. Welcome to Socialism Saturday. Socialism Saturday is when we watch the real far left. We are not talking about Democrats. We are not talking about liberals. Can I tell you guys, I'm so, I know this will be breaking news to people who watch my content all the time. I am so sick of the right confusing Democrats and liberals with socialists and communists. This is one of the things that just I've finally grown my hair out to like a respectable length, right? After years of people dragging me for my hair, after years of people saying I couldn't have a shaved head, even though it is just objectively the best haircut. It's so easy. It's so comfortable. It feels so good in the summer. And so I grew my hair out because, well, mostly I grew my hair out because my husband wanted me to. And so, I'll do things he wants me to every now and again. And so I finally grew my hair to a respectable length. And it took years of not cutting it to get it to this length. And I want to pull it all out. I want to pull it all out. I want to pull it all out of my head because I am so effing sick of people on the right not understanding that Democrats and liberals are not communists and socialists. And it's like, there's nothing that you can do. There's nothing that you can do. See, now I've messed up my hair. There's nothing that you can do. There is nothing that you can do to explain to a committed conservative retard that Democrats and liberals are not the same thing as socialists and communists. They are committed to this lie. This lie is part of their identity. They truly believe that every time they're dunking on the libs on Twitter, they are fighting the communists. Which is why the communists will win, inevitably, undeniably, because if there is no real opposition to them, why wouldn't they win? They've been winning for 100 years. They've been winning from the time the Frankfurt School brought all those Jewish intellectuals to set up shop at Columbia University back in the 30s. They've been winning in taking over all the K through 12 schools, all of higher education. They've been winning in terms of dictating culture for damn near, well, for the entire time that pretty much everyone watching this content has been alive. The real communists and socialists have been dictating the culture in this country, and they've done it slowly over the course of decades and decades and decades and decades and decades, but they're winning. And the reason they're winning is because there is no opposition to them. And then you go on the right, and the right says, the Democrats are all falling apart, and they're not even doing anything, and they got rid of David Hogg because he was a white man. And it's like, yeah, that's real nice that the Democrats got rid of David Hogg because he's a white man, and that's real funny and all that stuff. And, David Hogg got exactly what he deserved, but those are actually not socialists and communists. They're not the same thing. They're not the same thing at all in any way. Democrats are socialists. Democrats are communists. They're all communists. We're fighting the communists. Like, shut up. Seriously? Shut up. I can't anymore, guys. I can't. And that is part of why we do Socialism Saturday. It's part of why we watch so much far leftism on my channel, because I need to commiserate with people who understand that the real far left are not Democrats and liberals. The real far left are way more dangerous than Democrats and liberals. The real far left are way more effective than Democrats and liberals. And I don't know any other way to cope. I'm coping. That's really what's going on. Isn't everyone feeling good now? Isn't everyone feeling good? This is a very kind of like enticing introduction to this show where I'm kind of like, I'm really depressed and everything sucks and everyone is stupid and everything's awful and we're losing and the left is winning. And, maybe we want to just torture ourselves more. This is what this is. I'm a masochist at my core. I'm a masochist. I like to hurt myself, and therefore I like to hurt all of you along with me. So maybe I'm a sadist and a masochist at the same time. I don't know, man. I don't know. But I do know that when you're dealing with what is going to inevitably lead to the end of the country, it's nice to have friends. It's nice to have friends. It's nice to have comrades, as it were, when you're dealing with the inevitable socialist, communist, Marxist, whatever you want to call it, revolution in this country, based entirely on the fact that the only potential opposition to it are stupid and dumb and willfully ignorant and have no idea what's going on. I've been listening to these kind of like Oh, I mean, some might call them Nazis. Some might call them Nazis. I've been listening to some like extremely far right Twitter spaces lately, and I actually fell asleep listening to one last night, which I'm sure did wonders for me. I was like laying in bed. Victor fell asleep on the couch last night, and I'm like laying in bed, and I'm like listening to this Nazi, like, I mean, like legitimately, like very, white identitarian, very, very, very extremely racist, actual racism, not fake racism, like actual racism. I'm listening to this extremely far right Twitter space, like as I'm falling asleep, which I'm sure led to me having great subconscious thoughts while I was sleeping. And one of the reasons I've been listening to it is because the premise of what they're trying to do is to change people's minds. And when I say change people's minds, they are essentially like they're kind of pushing Adam Green's philosophy, which is Adam Green is a guy that has this idea, and he's not the only person that's ever had this idea, but he is one of the most prominent people pushing it right now, I think. He has this idea that and you don't have to agree with this, I'm just explaining what he believes, that that Christianity is essentially a Jewish psyop, that the Jews created Christianity in order to control the Gentiles. And so there are these Twitter spaces that happen, I mean, fairly frequently, like almost every day, in which people who are kind of like pushing Adam Green's ideas are having these Twitter spaces. And what they want to do is to get Christians to come into their Twitter space. I swear this is related to what we're doing. Just bear with me. We're doing a little intro so people have time to mosey in, okay? So the reason they're doing these spaces is because they want Christians to come and fight with them, essentially. And listen, you know me, I love listening to Christians getting dragged more than almost anything. And so I put aside my lack of agreement with them on some of their finer points regarding race, because I really do not like the race stuff like at all in any way. They really do. But they're also dragging Christians on the internet, which is funny for me to listen to, and so I do. And generally speaking, I agree with a lot of Adam Green's ideas anyway. But the reason that I've been listening to it, and one of the things I've been thinking about is like, is anyone actually changing anyone's mind with all the content that we create? Am I changing anyone's mind? Is Adam Green changing anyone's mind? Are the very masculine men running these Twitter spaces, are they actually changing anyone's mind? What is the process of changing people's minds? How do we even do that? Is that even possible? And if not, then what is the actual purpose of this? Well, maybe we are. I think I have changed minds. I think that I have been able to wake, maybe not as many as I would like up, but I think I've been able to wake a significant amount of people up to the fact that conservative influencers are lying to them about what the left is. I think I've been able to show people, just using the left's real videos, here's what's going on. I think I've been able to change minds from the right and the left. Not to pat myself on the back. I don't know how to scale that. I don't know how to change more minds. I would like to be able to change more minds. I would like more people to come around to what the left is actually doing, hinged into reality. But I don't know. I don't know how to, I'm just putting ideas out there on the internet, and I'm hoping people respond to it. And maybe my content will never get shared as much as it could because it's not as clickbait, it's not as outrage porn, it's not as any of these things. And I don't know. So that's something I've been thinking a lot about, is like, how do we actually, what is the process of actually changing people's minds? And so one of the reasons I've been listening to these Twitter spaces is I'm trying to figure out if they've actually done that. I'm trying to figure out if Adam Green has actually changed people's minds, if Adam Green's very, very masculine friends have actually changed people's minds, how they've done it, what is the process for doing it, what can I learn from that, how can I apply that here, things like that. And I feel like I'm trying to behave like a sane person, well, in the midst of just being constantly surrounded by insane people on all sides. Anyway, just some thoughts. Well, this is not what I'm talking about. See, this is a mistake that people on the right often make. I didn't say this at all. And I don't recognize you, so that's okay. I think you might be new here. I think it's very hard to change the minds of people who went through state and leftist indoctrination in schools. I'm not talking about changing the minds of people who are indoctrinated into the far left cult. I'm talking about changing the minds of people who claim to be anti-communists but don't actually know what communism is. I'm talking about changing the minds of people who listen to conservative influencers dunk on the libs every single day and honestly believe that liberals and Democrats are the same as communists. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the retarded right. I'm not talking about the cult indoctrinated left. I'm talking about the retarded right who cannot see past the end of their fucking nose to understand the enemy that they are actually fighting while claiming that they're doing all this good in the world when in fact what they're actually doing is akin to cleaning your house, but you're not cleaning your house. You're taking a mess that was in one room and you're moving it to another room. So now one room is clean, but the other room has the mess in it and you haven't actually cleaned up the mess. You've just taken it from one place and moved it to another. That's what the right is doing, and that's what I would really like to get them to stop. I would actually like them to clean up the fucking mess. I don't want to keep seeing the mess move from one room to another room to another room to another room to another room, only to have more stuff piled on top of it. I don't want to see that. I want to see them actually deal with the problem. That's what I would like to see. That's what I would like. Our goal has never been to wake up people from the far left. I have never stated that goal. See, you just got here. All good. All good. Hey, we welcome new people. If you're new here, especially like you got Patriot in your title, so I think you might be on the right. So if you're new here, welcome. So maybe you are exactly who I'm talking about today. That sounds like a marketing and charisma and communication issue. No, it's not. It's a gatekeeping issue on the right. It's a gatekeeping issue. I am absolutely convinced, and we'll get into the meat of the show in a second. We're going to have a good show tonight, but bear with me. I'm working out some feelings on the internet. Okay, it's my show. I'll do what I want. We are dealing with an influencer class on the right who makes money by lying to their audiences. Just full stop. Full stop. We are dealing with an influencer class on the right that has a vested interest in continuing to lie to their audience about what's going on. And that audience is so convinced that their influencers are telling them the truth that they don't even bother to fact check. That is the biggest problem that we have, is the gatekeeping on the right. And if you don't, did someone get hidden? Hang on. I didn't say to hide the Patriot guy on the channel. Guys, moderators, please. Okay, Judy did it accidentally. Sorry, Patriot guy. We didn't mean it. You're still welcome here. Sorry, it was an accident. Sorry. Thank you, Suzanne. Appreciate it. What we need to do is to figure out a way to break through the conservative influencer class bullshit. Because it's the conservative influencer class bullshit that has misinformed millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of people. And right now, I don't know how to break through that bullshit. I'm trying. What did your message say, Suzanne? I'll just type it in the chat. I'll just read it here. So if you guys have any ideas on how to do that, let me know. I'm trying to figure out how to do that. If you guys know of people who have actually changed people's minds, it doesn't necessarily need to be about this specific topic, but about something else, like some big part of their identity. Part of the reason I like Adam Green's content, and I've been listening to these Twitter spaces run by the very masculine men, is that they're trying to change people's minds, I think, in a way that is at the core of their identity. They're trying to get Christians to give up Christianity because Christianity is Jewish. Again, you don't need to agree with that, but I'm talking about what is the process for taking something that is part of a core of someone's identity and getting them to consume information that changes their mind on something that is very, very deeply important to them. That's what I'm interested in right now. And so if you guys have thoughts about that, or if you guys know of any other people who are trying to do that, because, well, yeah, see, yeah. But is there anyone else who's trying to do it? I don't know, man. I don't know. Anyway, I meandered long enough. Do you guys want to get into the content? You guys want to see what we're watching? We are watching Why is Music Hands there it goes. Okay. Have I done a video or a podcast on the timeline of how we got here? Oh, about 86,000 of those videos. I've done about 86,000 of those videos, Salvatore. 86,001 at least. Don't you feel that some conservative influencers are simply ignorant about real far left socialists? Yes, I do. Yes, I do. I think that most conservative influencers are completely ignorant about the far left, but that's their fault, isn't it? That's their fault. They're the ones not doing their due diligence before they run their mouths on the internet because they need clicks and clout and cash and all that stuff. Have you used video clips of the influencers to educate people? Well, it's funny that you asked that, Tiger's Nest. Yes, I have. And that is how we started the war with James Lindsay. And that is why James Lindsay blocked me and most of my community on Twitter. And all of James Lindsay's friends started blocking us because we were using literal video clips, not only of them, but trying to show them video clips. And they refused to look. And then after they blocked us, they ran smear campaign after smear campaign after smear campaign on me to try to discredit me based on character attacks rather than attacking the intellectual foundation of my work. So yeah, yep, we've tried that. Part of the reason you probably don't know that we've tried that is because they blocked us and ridiculed us and ignored us and told their entire audiences to block us and stuff like that. So that's what we're dealing with. That's what we're dealing with. We are dealing with profound, willful ignorance. So that's a great and very cheerful way to start off the show tonight. Welcome to Socialism Saturday, guys, where you will leave extremely optimistic about our chances in this whole war against the far left. But we do have a good show for today. We are returning to one of our favorite heroes, Sophie. I can't just let a good Sophie moment go by. I can't. And Sophie is on a book tour right now. And so Sophie has been doing a lot of interviews. And we have the era of the blue wall has apparently returned. When I saw this video earlier, I was like, is this an older video of Sophie or is this new? Because Sophie only used to do interviews against this blue wall like 3 years ago. If you don't know who Sophie is, don't worry. We will introduce you to our goddess. Sophie is my first and only true internet love. Even with the other internet boyfriends that I've dabbled with, none of them have ever held a candle to Sophie. Sophie is our goddess. She is our ginger dragon. She is our everything on this channel. Sophie is an abolish the family communist. She has written multiple books about abolishing the family. She has gone on speaking tours all over the world to talk about abolishing the family. She has participated in all of my favorite socialist events. She is a non-binary queer Marxist / communist. She teaches at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, or is some sort of like visiting fellow or something like that at one of their weird gender centers. She teaches classes on all this stuff, and she writes books, and we love her. And the reason we love her is that Sophie says the quiet part out loud all the time. And so we end up listening to a lot of Sophie's content because Sophie is delightful and she says some really crazy shit. And so it is our moral obligation to listen to everything that Sophie Lewis says on the internet. I even dedicated one of my recent books to Sophie. I dedicated my Debunking the Communist Manifesto book to Sophie, which I'm sure she really, really, really appreciated and was very grateful for, because I don't just give out book dedications willy-nilly. It's because Sophie is the communist mirror of me. Okay. She's an Aries. Maybe I have red hair because I dyed my hair to be like Sophie. Who knows? That's actually not what happened. But I might say it. I might say that's what happened, because Sophie is my communist mirror. Sophie and I have an understanding with each other, I feel like. And so that's why we watched so much Sophie today. And so we're going to be watching her, and she did an interview, and this was 3 days ago, about Abolish the Family, Enemy Feminisms. That's her book, but on the thumbnail for this interview, it says Sophie Lewis on feminism, communism, and sex. And so I'm down for hearing, yep, Sophie loves us. Sophie never gets mad at us and blocks me on Blue Sky for no good reason, Sophie, even though I can still see your account, Sophie, because I have a sock account that you don't know about on Blue Sky, Sophie. So it doesn't matter if you block my main account on Blue Sky, Sophie. I can still see everything you're saying on Blue Sky. And Sophie hasn't blocked me on Twitter. She did for about an hour. She did, maybe it was even a couple days. Sophie did have me blocked on Twitter, and then I DM'd her on Instagram, and I said, Sophie, I'm not going to release a clip out of context to you that I recorded at that undercover thing I did. And Sophie unblocked me on Twitter because I said I wasn't going to throw her under the bus because we have an understanding. All right. She might not agree that we have an understanding. Sophie might not agree that Sophie and I have an understanding, but I feel in my heart of hearts that Sophie and I have an unspoken understanding between us as Aries women, and that is why she has not blocked me on Twitter yet. Anyway. So we're going to be watching Sophie tonight, and I'm fairly certain Sophie is talking to a trans person because this person's pronouns are they, she, apparently, and they're going to be talking about her book, and we're going to watch it, and we're going to love it, and we're going to break down what Sophie is talking about. And so, is there anyone in the chat that has never watched a Sophie video with us before? Who is a Sophie newbie? Whose cherry are we popping tonight with the ginger dragon? One in the chat if you are completely new to Sophie. 2 in the chat if you're a Sophie veteran and you've been down this road with me before. I just want to get a sense of who's watching tonight. What channel is it from? It's from a channel called A Sunny Book Nook with apparently 44,000 subscribers. Oh, look at all these Sophie noobs. Okay, got some veterans. Dana's a noob. Tiger's a noob. You've never seen Sophie before. No Step on Snake has not seen Sophie before. You're gonna get your first Sophie experience tonight, everyone. Oh, call music. Not only has me, don't listen to him. Okay, he's a liar. Musican's a liar. Don't listen to him. Not only has Musican seen Sophie on multiple occasions, Musican's read all of Sophie's books. Anyway, that's what we're going to be watching tonight, guys. If you feel like it while we're on the stream tonight, the very best way to support the work I'm doing is by heading over to my Substack and signing up for a membership. $8 a month, $80 a year. I am 100% funded to do this by you guys. When you fund my work on Substack or by making a one-time gift or on Patreon or Locals or any of those other things, the full options for how you can fund my work are going to be in the description below, but my preferred method is through Substack, of course. When you fund the work I'm doing, you're funding my ability to spend time researching this stuff, writing about this stuff, breaking this stuff down for you guys, spending time finding all these videos, because oftentimes we watch videos that no one else has watched. We watch them before anyone else, and then the conservative influencers come in and they try to steal my stuff, but then I put so much branding on the videos lately that they can't steal it. That's why there's so much like my videos lately basically look like a NASCAR like car with like all the stickers over it. I've got a sticker here, like I've got so much F off branding on my videos lately, simply because you guys don't understand the pain. Conservatives used to come and steal my stuff like all the time. I had to lock down my content for a long time because people were just stealing it left and right. And so now I've just decided I'm just going to put F off branding across all of my videos. And then if conservatives really want to do the work of erasing all of the branding, they can do that, but I've made it much harder for them. Anyway, so if you want to support my ability to do this, because if I'm not doing this, this content doesn't get out on the internet, because God knows no one else is doing this type of research. Please head over to my Substack, sign up for a membership, $8 a month, $80 a year. You do get a variety of perks when you do support on my Substack, to include access to my supporter Discord. We do movie nights on Sunday and Monday nights in the Discord. Tomorrow, we're going to be watching the original classic Alien in the Discord at 8 p.m. Mac B has got Max Monster Movie Month due on Mondays at 9 p.m. He's watching Godzilla movies, I think. He's watching very old school monster movies this month. So that's going to be pretty great. And so that's just one of the perks you get when you sign up as a supporter. You also get access to my spy streams. You get access to supporter exclusive content. And you help fund all this, which I really appreciate, because you guys allow me to stay nonpartisan and not beholden to any political interest, which is pretty great. So before we get started, I would like to know, are there any Socialism Saturday newbies in the chat? Let us know if you are a Socialism Saturday newbie. Now, we do have a list of rules for Socialism Saturday newbies, and I'm going to be playing that list of rules in a moment here, but I just want to know, who is new to watching socialism with me? It's very, very important that you guys let us know, and there's nothing to be ashamed about. We just want to know who's new and who's not, because new people need to learn some things about what it means to watch socialism, because you might not understand the language, and we want to make sure we're helping the new people along, because when you first start watching real socialism, it is completely different than what you probably think it is. And so if you're new, we want to help you acclimate to this, because once you acclimate to this, you will see some of the most crazy dystopian things you have ever seen in your life. We will show you the craziest content that no one else on the internet has shown you, but it does take a little bit of adjustment, okay? So if you let us know that you're new, we can help you down that road. Donnie, this is your second time watching. Welcome, welcome. No Step on Sake says spy streams are awesome. Y'all should support. Yeah, we've been doing a lot of great spy streams lately. Thank you for that support. Russell, I think you're relatively new. Patriot, I just haven't been here a pretty long time, so I might be behind. Yeah, so if you used to watch, I've actually been getting a lot of people that have been coming back to the channel lately for some reason. Like maybe you watched my content when I first got started, like 3 years ago or something like that. So if you're relatively new to what I'm doing and have been doing for the last couple years now, you probably haven't watched it yet. So welcome back. We're really glad you're here. We're going to show you some crazy, crazy, crazy stuff. But before we do that, guys, we do have an educational video that is going to lay down the rules of Socialism Saturday, because we do have rules here. If you're going to come and participate, we need to make sure this is a learning environment for everyone. And so I want to play the video about the rules for Socialism Saturday. Let us know if you have questions, and then we will get started on this video. And here are the rules. Enjoy. All right, for anyone that's new, we have some rules for Socialism Saturday. Let me go over them real quick. Socialism Saturday is a research group and a class. We do take this seriously. You're allowed to have fun. You're allowed to have a drink or two. You're allowed to kind of kick back and joke in the chat. However, I need everyone to understand that when we are researching the radical revolutionary left, we do take this seriously. And so if you're shitposting in my chat, I'm going to tell you to stop.
Hi, Sophie. Thanks so much.
If you are posting off topic in the chat, I'm going to ask you to stop at some point, because it's going to be distracting to what we're doing. I need you to think of yourself as in a classroom. And I'm not talking about an online classroom. I'm talking about a real life classroom, okay? When you walk into a real life classroom, I am the teacher, you are the students. You are sitting in the desk, I am sitting in the front of the classroom. I'm standing there teaching you what is going on. If you were in a real life classroom, you wouldn't walk in, start throwing shit at the wall, yelling, saying, I disagree with you because my best friend said something different. That's not allowed. I don't care about your feelings. I'm not going to coddle your opinion. And that's going to be the way it is. And if you don't like it, you don't have to be here. But if you are in my classroom, you will respect my rules and you will listen to me. And if you do not do that, then you will be removed. And how you feel about being removed makes no difference to me at all. The expectation is if you're going to be here and you're going to be watching socialism with us and you're going to be participating in the chat, you are doing it because you are serious about learning this topic and understanding this topic. The minute that I think that you're just fucking around or you're trolling or something like that, you're going to get put in a timeout or permanently banned, and that's just going to be the way it is. Rule number 2, don't be a dick. Do not insult me. Do not insult other people in the chat. I can do whatever I want because I am the queen fascist bitch of my YouTube channel. So I can say and do whatever I want. But if you don't insult me and you don't insult other people in the chat, we're not going to have a problem. So be an adult, rein that shit in. Number 3, no whining. I don't care about your feelings. I don't care if you feel personally attacked. It makes no difference to me at all. And I promise you, I care about your feelings a little bit more than the left does. So if you can't handle me, you can't handle the left. If you start whining and complaining because you don't like the rules or you think you're being treated unfairly, you can just leave, bro. There's the door. You don't have to be here. Number 4, listen. Our job here and why we do Socialism Saturday is to listen to what the left is saying, to listen to what real leftists are doing in the real world. This is not to support your confirmation bias. This is not to support any conservative bullshit narrative that you may have heard on Glenn Beck that one time. This is not to be what you want it to be. This is to engage with reality. We need to listen, we need to actively listen, and we need to understand the left better than they understand themselves. That is the purpose of this exercise, okay? As part of that, I do ask that people refrain from debunking. You do not have a single debunk in your arsenal about the left is stupid because of reasons X, Y, B, and Z, or the left is her hypocrites for reasons X, Y, B, and Z. You don't have a single debunk that we haven't heard before, okay? And every time you put energy into debunking, that is energy that you're not putting into listening. So if I see you debunking, I'm going to tell you to stop, because you need to put that energy into listening instead. Lastly, break the rules of my chat or disrespect me in any way, and I'll just kick you out, and that's the way it is. All right, guys, those are the rules of Socialism Saturday. I hope everyone understands the rules. Please be sure to abide by the rules. The rules are to help all of us to create a nice learning environment. If you're chill, we're going to be chill. As long as you're listening, we want to show you what's going on. If you have questions about what's going on, instead of if you have the urge to debunk something, just stop yourself and instead ask a question about that thing, okay? Because debunking puts you in a state of defensiveness where you're not going to be receptive to information. If you're asking a question about it, that's a different thing. So we want as many questions as possible. If you're new here, especially, make sure you're asking questions about everything, but just resist that inner urge to debunk. I know it's going to be very, very hard, and I know you don't want to do it, but we have to be listening to what the left is saying. And every time we're listening just to it in order to get our rocks off by dunking on the libs, that means we're not actually listening to what they're saying, okay? So Sophie's going to give us a lot of information tonight. Sophie always does. And it's our job to take in this experience and get as much from it as possible. So if you have questions, let us know. Oh, by the way, I do have on Socialism Saturdays what I believe is a nominal super chat goal. I don't do super chat goals most days of the week, but I do super chat goals on Socialism Saturday. So I do like to front load the goal. So if you appreciate the work I'm doing, if you appreciate me taking several hours out of my schedule on a Saturday night to walk you guys through this stuff, to show it, to break it down, to explain what's going on, please throw in a $5 super chat, $10 super chat, $100 super chat, $500 super chat if you're feeling really generous. Please throw in a super chat to the pot. Help me hit the nominal goal. We do like to front load this on Socialism Saturday. And so the sooner that we hit that goal, the more I'm going to be so much nicer if we hit that goal in like the first 15 minutes. I'll tell you that right now. It will be a much better stream for everyone. Okay, so we have $1 in right now. Suzanne has already contributed $1. Please go ahead and throw your money into the pot. And the sooner we hit the goal, the happier I'm going to be on the stream, which is going to be better for everyone. All right, let's get this party started. We are watching our favorite, Abolish the Family Feminist, Sophie Lewis.
Hi, Sophie. Thanks so much for joining me today. Did you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, Sunny. Thanks for having me. My name's Sophie Lewis. I live in Philadelphia on Lenape land. I used to be an academic, at least I did a PhD, and then I sort of leaned out of the university and became a writer and a speaker, and I teach online courses outside of the academy at the Brooklyn Institute for Social Research, and anyone can sign up for those. But basically, since 2017 or so, I've been writing books and essays, and there's also a Patreon that I run to make ends meet. It's called Repro Utopia. But my first book was called Full Surrogacy Now, and it was about gestational labor, which is to say pregnancy, whether that's waged in the context of...
Hang on. No. Nope. We don't do this here, Warren. You must be new. We do not call Sophie names like that. We do not use that language in reference to her. If you have a question about what she's teaching, go ahead and ask a question. But no. This is not accepted. Did you not just listen to the rules video that I literally just played, bro? We're not doing this here. This is disruptive. It is not helping anyone learn. I don't want to see any more of this.
Assisted reproduction, or unwaged in the context of the private nuclear household, the family. And that was unexpectedly quite a successful kind of book. And so I ended up being able to continue to kind of operate like this it's hard in this day and age to be a writer. Sure. And so I clarified what was essentially the jumping off point of full surrogacy now, the family abolition. politics.
All right, Warren, did you not watch the video that I played on at the beginning of the stream? What do you not understand? With it, you have a chat room full of communists. Bro, you don't even understand where the fuck you are. You don't even understand where the fuck you are. You think we're a chat room full of communists? Are you a retard? What is your IQ exactly? What is your IQ? Do you know any of what you're talking about at all? If I have to slap down some fucking retarded conservative at the beginning of the stream so this stuff doesn't happen the entire... I laid out the entire message at the beginning. We're going to have a nice stream where we're not doing this conservative bullshit. What happens? Stupid-ass conservative comes in and starts acting like an unhinged retard. Do you know where you are? Do you know what we're doing? I played an entire video less than 10 minutes ago saying, don't do this shit. So what are you here for? Thank you, Donnie girl. I appreciate that. See, look at this. I start yelling at people and instantly I get $25 in super chats from Judy and Donnie. I appreciate you guys. Let's get those added to the pot. Warren, if you do anything that is unhinged retardy again in my chat, you're going to be permanently banned. If you want to listen and learn, then sit your ass down, shut up, and learn. Let's continue.
Horizon, which a lot of people had never heard of. Exactly. And so this short follow-up book kind of clarified what I mean by abolition of the family, which is to say the communization of care. And so that was what kind of made my name to some extent. And then I also wrote another book recently. It's called Enemy Feminisms.
Yes.
Enemy Feminisms.
Oh, look
which
at
is
this.
a sort of
Okay. Warren, I'm very, 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 very sorry. You are not fucking smart enough to be here. So you are now permanently banned from my channel. You're not even getting a timeout, bro. You're just going to be permanently banned. You are not smart enough to be here. Goodbye. Hey, Tolkien fan in with the $50 super sticker. Thank you. This makes me feel so much better about having to remove an unhinged, retarded conservative at the very beginning of the stream. Every time. We don't get leftists on this stream yelling at us. We get unhinged, retarded conservatives on the stream yelling at us.
Different book in some ways, and yet at the same time, also still doing the same thing I think I'm always doing, which we can get into if you're interested. But it's a look at our enemies rather than talking primarily about the kinds of care communizational feminisms that I dream of. And so that's where I'm at right now. I'm sort of returning to the...
Yeah, actually, Kev, I saw this on the video that you sent me on Twitter. So Sophie does reference Kollontai quite a bit when she's talking. So you're absolutely right that we do need to look into Kollontai more.
Theme of family abolition again with my upcoming book, which is going to be on the liberation of children. I haven't actually really started writing it yet, but...
I'm sorry, what was that? Sophie is writing a book on the liberation of children? Sophie, are you about to give us the best gift you've ever given us in your life, Sophie? Are you about to write a whole book about how children are but little adults that should be allowed to make all of their own decisions, regardless of their age? Because Sophie doesn't believe in parental rights at all in any way. We know this because we literally have Sophie on video saying, fuck parental rights explicitly. And now Sophie's about to write a book on the liberation of children. Pro-life, anti-war sounds like a terrible idea to abolish the family, and that's not naysay. That's my honest opinion. That doesn't. Okay, so to be very clear, that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is, do you understand why they want to abolish the family? Do you understand why they're going after it. How you feel about it, quite frankly, makes no difference at all in any way, because the purpose of this is to understand why they are doing what they're doing. Okay, so that's the question you should be asking then. Inserting personal opinions into the chat, this makes no difference at all. If you want to understand why they're doing it, then you need to ask that question, because that is what we are primarily concerned with. Hey, look at that! Sophie is the gift that keeps on giving, and Kristen has gotten us to our $100 goal. See, I told you guys I was going to be in a much better mood as soon as we met that goal. Now, I want everyone to still feel free to send me money and stuff. We have met our goal, and I want to thank everyone who has met the goal. Why? See, I love this. I love it when I say to someone, you should ask questions about these things, and then they actually do it. So everyone, welcome, pro-life, anti-war. Thank you for asking the question. The reason the left wants to abolish the family, and we have heard Sophie saying this in particular, since she is one of the major people pushing abolish the family on the left today. Well, there are several reasons. First off, they believe that the primary reason that the left wants to abolish the nuclear family is they believe that the nuclear family is the literal means of reproduction of capitalism. So ultimately, the left's goal is always and forever to abolish capitalism. They define capitalism explicitly as private property ownership. One of the things that private property ownership means is parental rights. They consider parental rights to be a form of private property. Why do they consider parental rights to be a form of private property? Because parental rights allows for the passing of private individual wealth from one generation to the next in terms of like inheritance and things like that. They also consider parental rights to be a form of private property. And this is what we just heard Sophie say, and I know this is what her book's going to be about, because I heard Sophie talk about children's liberation at the Socialism 2023 conference in person when I was undercover at that event. Sophie explicitly believes that children are but little adults who can make all their own decisions for themselves, and she believes therefore parental rights keep children in a form of servitude to their adults. So it's akin to abolishing slavery in their minds. It also has to do with access to care. So right now, and this is also another argument Sophie makes, right now they believe that care is distributed based on who our nuclear family is. So you have access to the insurance that your parents have, or the insurance of your spouse, or things like that. And so they believe that all care should be available to everyone, and that the nuclear family keeps care privatized within the individual family unit, which is in itself perpetuating capitalism. So those are the reasons they want to abolish the family. Ultimately, it all does come back to the reproduction of capitalism. This is called social reproduction theory. And they believe that if they disrupt the nuclear family, they will disrupt the reproduction of capitalist values in a capitalist society. And so that is why they're trying to do it. I hope that answers your question. If you have any other questions, let us know. Children's oh no. Conservatives, I need you to rein in all of your obsession with pedophilia right now explicitly. Because this is one of the and no step on snake, this is no offense to you, no offense. But this is one of the pieces of damage that conservatives have done to the general public's misunderstanding of what the left believes. I have explicitly heard Sophie say in person that she does not believe children should be sexualized. It is not about that at all in any way. There is no evidence that it is about that in any way. The only evidence that people have is like one clip from one guy that they trot around all the time saying this is proof that the left is sexualizing children. Well, they ignore every other aspect of it. Because the left does not talk about sexualizing children. In fact, I hear the left talk about protecting children from sexualization more than I hear them talk about anything that could be remotely construed as the sexualization of children. I'm not making the argument that sexualizing children doesn't happen. I'm saying it is a separate problem from what we're talking about. And every single time this gets conflated, every single time we talk about children's liberation, this is what conservatives think, because they are completely fucking obsessed with pedophilia, and it derails the entire rest of the discussion. So I do appreciate you asking the question. That is not what they're talking about, though. No, explicitly. Who is responsible for the child's safety? The community. The community. The collective. There is no parental rights. Everyone belongs to everyone else. Let's see. Who would hold legal responsibility? Oh, you think there's going to be laws? You think there's going to be laws? There's going to be no police in the socialist utopia. There's going to be no courts in the socialist utopia. There's going to be no prisons in the socialist utopia. Why would you think there's any sort of legal responsibility at all in the socialist utopia? They want to abolish all those things. Let's listen to Sophie say she's going to write a book about child liberation again.
Theme of family abolition again with my upcoming book, which is going to be on the liberation of children. I haven't actually really started writing it yet, but I've been writing about it at the same time, low key, for some time. So anyway,
yeah, that's so exciting. I know there's another. I think someone I saw someone on Twitter like probably months ago at this point post about
every single thing that we're telling you. We have them on video saying. So you can come in here and get your feelings hurt because you don't know what the fuck is going on. And you can lash out against us because no one ever told you this, because you probably listen to people who lie to you for money. But the reality is that every single thing that we are saying to you, every single moment that we have taken time out of our stream today to answer your questions, we have them on video saying this. And there are people in the chat right now that have been watching this stuff with me for 4 years that have heard them say this over and over and over and over and over again. So do you know what I think sounds insane? I think it sounds insane when conservatives listen to the same old conservative influencers lying to them over and over and over and over and over again. They refuse to look at primary source evidence. They refuse to take out information that goes against their worldview. They have no idea of the enemy that they're fighting. You probably think that Democrats and communists are the same thing. Do you think that we don't think it's insane that your people think that Democrats are the same as communists when communists denounce Democrats literally all the fucking time? You can either stay and learn, or you can be mad and leave and stay ignorant. And I don't really care which it is.
How they have a book coming out about children's liberation. And I'm really excited for that book as well, because yeah, it's so related to the family abolition and the sort of feminist utopian dreams that you write about. And I do think like what you were saying about how your previous work sort of then it's a little bit of a diversion, enemy feminisms, like, but not really, because I think like enemy feminisms to me read like a very comprehensive history of a lot of different aspects of feminist movements that then evolved in different ways and how they informed contemporary manifestations of feminism. I'm curious about how your idea for enemy feminism like came about, I suppose. Was this in the research of or like in constructing your family abolitionist work, or I don't know, where did you kind of come up with the idea to write about enemy feminisms?
Yeah.
Before Sophie answers, does everyone remember what Sophie's definition of enemy feminisms is? Because we have watched presentations like this before. I want to know who's paying attention. When Sophie Lewis says enemy feminisms, what does Sophie mean by that? There is a very specific meaning that she has. Not all. Sophie hates most feminists. Well, why would she hate most feminists? She's a socialist, Karlyn. Why don't socialists love feminism? Well, no, not all. No. What does Sophie mean when she says enemy feminisms? It's more than just TERFs. No. TERF is not the correct answer. It goes way beyond TERF. What does Sophie mean when she says enemy feminisms? We know this. We've heard her say it before. I'm just going to give people one more second to answer. Aha! See? Misogan. I can always rely on you, if nothing else. He loves my boobs and he gives me the right answer. And that's really all I care about. Feminism that doesn't involve anti-capitalism. That is what Sophie means when she says enemy feminists. She means feminists who do not have anti-capitalism as part of their feminist ideology. So TERFs would be an example of that, but I don't accept TERFs as an answer just because it's not an explicit answer to why she thinks they're enemy feminists, and that's why. No. No one said they're okay. You're not listening yet. There are no police in the socialist utopia. There are no police. There are no courts. There are no prisons. Who do you want to enforce the laws? The laws are what the community says. The laws are the community standard. If you don't follow the community standard, you don't eat. That is what is going on. So no, what you are trying to do right now is your head is spinning because we're giving you more information than you've ever been given about the left, probably in the entire time that you've been listening to this stuff. And you're trying to take this information and fit it into the paradigm that you understand. But the paradigm that you understand is not the society that they're trying to build. What you need to do right now is you need to listen and you need to learn, okay? You need to listen and you need to accept that trying to fit their worldview into the framework that you understand is not going to be successful. No. You're not understanding. You're not. Okay. My recommendation for you is going to be that you stop talking now and that you just sit back and listen. You're not going to learn anything if you keep doing this. Just sit back and listen. The answer to your question is you need to sit back and listen. No one's being mean to you, but we understand what's going on right now, and we understand that you're trying to rationalize this in a way that it is not going to be rationalized. And if you actually want to learn, what you need to do is sit and listen.
That's a great point. And by the way, I just wanted to second what you said about the book that you saw mentioned online. I think that's coming out soon. It's by my comrade Madeline Lane McKinley, and she and I, along with a couple of others, have been kind of part of, I think, a revival of family abolitionist, children's liberationist politics on the communist feminist left, and by communist, I mean small c communization theory, sort of anti-state ultra-leftism, I suppose. Where I came up with the idea for enemy feminisms is
actually, someone asked me about the term ultra-leftism the other day. I don't think I'd ever actually heard anyone else say ultra-leftism, and now we have a definition for ultra-leftism. She means small c communism, a communized community. Okay.
Interesting one. It already in full surrogacy now, I spend quite a lot of time trying to sort of show how there are, I guess you could say, enemy feminisms on different sides of the issue of contract pregnancy, or what people call surrogacy, right? Commodified gestational labor. Because the most obvious formation in the world is the sort of stop surrogacy now feminist position, which is prohibitionist, I would say. It might call itself abolitionist in the sense that people who want to criminalize sex work in many parts of the world also sometimes call themselves abolitionists. But I'm always arguing that the word abolition is worth keeping in our camp as a thing that means...
All right, pro-life. There are a lot of people in the chat that are trying to help you right now. There are a lot of people in the chat that are giving you really good advice, and it kind of seems like you're not being very receptive to that. So now what's going to happen is I'm going to put you in a 5-minute timeout. It's only 5 minutes, but you're not going to be able to talk. So now you're going to listen. And if you come back after that 5 minutes and you are disrespectful to me, or you are disrespectful to other people in the chat who are going out of their way to try to help you learn, then we are going to make the time out even longer. Okay.
Something very precise that has to do with positive supersession rather than prohibition. And I, it's not, the case that people on the street necessarily understand abolish to mean, turn inside out, transform everything, preserve, transform, destroy all at once. This very complex kind of synthesis of meanings that Aufhebung, abolition in this sense means, as in to abolish something, you actually really, have to remake the world around that thing in order to make it sort of obsolete. And paradoxically, that means attending to something in the kernel of the thing that you're abolishing, the need that that thing is pretending or purporting to meet in the present in the world has to be taken seriously if you're actually going to succeed at abolishing this thing, or to enact abolition through the sort of the vinculum, the point that you're naming here. But I think all abolitionisms or abolition projects are connected. So in a sense, I've been saying this thing about how we need to resist the misappropriation of the term abolition by mere carceral prohibitionists, including feminist ones, for quite some time. On the one hand, you have quite obviously
So I think the argument that Sophie's making is there are a lot of feminists that want to abolish certain things, but that's not enough. I think so. The term abolition on the left, typically, what you're going to find with the term abolition is that it's used in regards to prison abolition, or what Sophie might call carceral abolition. And I think what Sophie is saying is that we need to resist the use of the term abolition to just be in reference to these things, because ultimately Sophie's real goal is to abolish capitalism. And so if abolition is only in reference to prison or carceral abolition, then that is going to lead to the creation of like enemy feminisms, where they might agree with the prison abolition stuff, but that doesn't necessarily mean they want to go for like the full capitalist abolition.
Or for many on the left, more obviously sort of enemy figures who are kind of celebrating surrogacy, bio-capital as a kind of women helping women, sort of neoliberal, philanthrocapitalists.
Neoliberal.
Fine. I don't think it's very convincing to many people that somehow, the uneven and combined development that sort of scoops up labor, uterine labor in parts of the world along neocolonial sorts of axes of exploitation for the benefit of the sort of households and infertility problems of the global north are really representative of meaningful sort of feminist solidarity. But at the same time, I was sort of saying there's a Scylla and Charybdis kind of thing here. Falling into the surrogacy is bad camp is also a real risk, a real problem here, because when you fall into this kind of merely anti-commodification, sort of like, let's protect mothers from the predations of the market into their wombs kind of politics, it's not to say that there's not a lot that's right about the shop floor conditions, the working conditions of gestational labor, employees, surrogates on the global scene. But when we get into the exceptionalization of this particular form of industry, we forget what is, I think, one of the most profoundly important insights of feminism tout court, which is that the family per se is the site of enormous amounts of invisibilized capitalist violence, right? So when you start,
the family is the site of invisibilized capitalist violence, because the nuclear family to the left is a form of capitalist reproduction. No. Until you know how the left defines capitalism, and until you can until you can explain why the left wants to abolish the nuclear family, you don't get comments like this. This woman has been extremely productive in the entire time that she has been active on the left. This woman has influenced thousands, tens of thousands of people. around abolishing the nuclear family. This woman has done tours all over the world preaching abolish the family. She has convinced countless people, while you're saying she's on antidepressants. No, she's not. She is extremely productive. She's out every single day pushing these ideas. You have no fucking clue who she is. You have no fucking clue what she talks about. You have no fucking clue how extremely radicalizing she is on the left. So until you know those things, you keep this bullshit to yourself because we don't want to hear it. You think it's wrong to mute someone? I don't give a flying fuck. You just got muted for 24 hours. Goodbye. I don't know what is so difficult to understand about I am the queen fascist bitch of my YouTube channel, and you are here by my consent, and I'm taking time out of my schedule to teach you, to break this stuff down for you. There are other people in the chat that are taking time to try to teach you things, and then you complain about when literally everyone in the chat tells you to shut up and listen. And you're like, I think it's wrong to tell people to shut. Like, we don't give a fuck. We don't care. We don't care. We don't care. We don't care what you think. I told you guys I was going to be happy if we met the super chat goal, and now I have retards in my chat. These people are not stupid. They're smart. They're subversive. They're clever. They're cunning. They know how to propagandize.
To say, oh, it's the commodification, it's the marketization, when it becomes explicit that is the problem. You're basically kind of throwing out the window what used to be a much more commonly acknowledged and insisted upon feminist insight, which is that the sort of so-called natural, unassisted, I guess, like not surrogate kind of site of anthrogenesis, the manufacture of human beings, is already a problem. We don't want to be sort of defending it exactly, right? So we have to kind of be, and this is so much the case with so much abolition politics, you have to be able to do two things at once and hold two things at once in your head. So how do we think about solidarity between what currently tends to get called mothers and those people who we designate as as surrogates or carriers or whatever? Because in a sense, the materialist position I'm interested in as well is it, it's incumbent on us to recognize that the surrogacies that generate life worth living are already there latently. We are all, I say in full surrogacy now, that we're the makers of one another already. The problem is we don't have a society that means that we act like it. So the task, in a sense, is to see how we might create infrastructures and social relations that are sort of worthy of the horizon full surrogacy that
okay, what Sophie is talking about there is that this is the basis of what I tried to explain earlier about why they want to abolish the nuclear family. What Sophie is talking about there is we are already the makers of one another. We are already the caretakers of one another. And we need to remake society in a way that reflects that we are all surrogates for one another. This is part of Sophie's primary argument about abolishing the family. She believes that the nuclear family is restrictive in terms of how people receive care, what type of care they receive, things like that. So if you're dependent upon your family for health care, then the care that you have access to is restricted based on the nuclear family. And so her position is everyone should have access to all healthcare. This is where the idea of universal healthcare comes from. Okay? So universal healthcare is one of the ways that they are trying to poke at the nuclear family. Because if you're not dependent on your family for healthcare, if all healthcare is available to everyone, that is actually getting to one of the goals they have of communizing society around their ideas. Does everyone understand that? Well, you're not going to win points by saying they're insane on this channel. You're going to win points by accurately understanding what they want and what their ideas are. So you may be confused about what we're doing here. This is not about dunking on the libs to get your rocks off. Okay.
Recognizes that there are already these flows promiscuously and porously sort of transcending the boundaries of institutions like the family that we think of as quite individually autonomous. So already there was that kind of enemy feminism kind of gesture. But the more I got into care communization politics, the more I realized I was basically saying that this is feminism. My lineage of feminism that I care about is abolition of the family. And this maybe was not controversial for someone at the very beginning of the 19th century who was a utopian socialist who invented the term feminism, right? Charles Fourier, also a colonialist, not someone I want to romanticize, but some years after Mary Wollstonecraft, supposedly, created feminism's Anglophone existence with a very pro-family kind of maternalist orientation, although she's got plenty of things that are interesting and worth taking seriously and so on, but her vision for feminism is very much that you don't have to change everything about the world, you just have to elevate mother within the home to a position of human rationality and proprietary authority over the children and therefore the future of the British Empire and the nation and so on. Whereas, in a sense, a few years later, you get an opposite definition, literally opposite, not variations on a theme, not like a slight disagreement. Literally, feminism is the opposite, the insurgency of women and children against the private nuclear household, against the family. And
wasn't that a wonderful definition that Sophie just gave us of what she believes feminism is? Feminism is the insurgency of women and children against the nuclear family. Again?
Slight disagreement. Literally, feminism is the opposite, the insurgency of women and children against the private nuclear household, against the family.
Feminism is the insurgency of women and children against the private nuclear household, against the family. Because they believe that the nuclear family is a form of private property. They believe that parental rights are a form of private property. They believe the nuclear family is the reproduction mechanism of capitalism. Capitalism is not reproduced without it being produced in the family, because the family is where the children are reproduced, and then the children are raised with capitalist values within what she just called the private nuclear family. And so that is how capitalism is reproduced. Does everyone understand that? Let's listen one more time. Literally, feminism is the opposite, the insurgency of.
Not like a slight disagreement. Literally, feminism is the opposite, the insurgency of women and children against the private nuclear household, against the family. And it is that insight that led me to think about a book that would go a bit further than some of the conversations I was seeing around white feminism, because I was thinking there's something not very necessarily.
When Sophie says white feminism, she does not mean white skin color. She means capitalism.
Sort of exciting and erotically or libidinally stirring about some of these framings. I mean, a lot of the scholars are just wonderful who have done this work on white feminism, so it's in a way it's not the fault of, I'm not coming for anyone here exactly, right? But it's just when we frame problematic feminisms as a question of sort of, slight differences or mistakes or errors,
variations on a theme, as you were saying.
Yeah, I don't think we quite get deep enough into how feminism in the West has come about, which has been genuinely a kind of inside this thing, whatever it is, feminism, there are two wolves. It's not a question of like differences, it's actually antagonism. It's like feminism is something complicated enough, and it's hard to think about in this way, but it's literally got its own enemies inside it. The problem is gender already is such a clusterfuck, such an implosion of a concept, that when you build on top of it, you maybe I don't know, maybe automatically get into this kind of position where you're saying you're fighting for completely incompatible worlds, So one of them, I think, can be described a little bit in terms of securitization for women, or perhaps also elevation. And the other one is about transcendence. And so this is the difference, in a sense, between prohibitionism and abolitionism.
What does Sophie mean when she says transcendence? We're going to go back. What does Sophie mean when she says transcendence? In the context of Sophie has just said that gender is a clusterfuck of a concept, and then later she says transcendence. We need transcendence. What does that mean? No, this is not a burn your bra feminism. Sophie is not in favor of the burn your bra feminism. Sophie doesn't care about wearing a bra. Yes, to transcend gender. What they mean by that is they don't want transition. Trans to these people does not mean transition. It means transcend. When for trans people who are transitioning from man to woman or woman to man, that means trans means transition. It means they acknowledge that two genders exist and they're trying to go from one to the other. That's transition. Transcend is to go above and beyond the concept of gender entirely. It's about abolishing the idea that gender exists because they think that gender is a massive clusterfuck.
Complicated enough, and it's hard to think about in this way, but it's literally got its own enemies inside it. The problem is gender already is such a clusterfuck, such an implosion of a concept that when you build on top of it, you maybe automatically get into this kind of position where you're saying you're fighting for completely incompatible worlds, So one of them, I think, can be described a little bit in terms of securitization for women, or perhaps also elevation.
Hey.
And the other one,
never, ever, 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 ever fucking say something like this in my chat ever again. No fucking Fed posting bullshit. No talking about violence. No doing this ever. Do you understand me? What the fuck is wrong with you? Would you ever walk into a classroom in the real world and say, they think that till they get punched in the face, bro? What the fuck is wrong with you? Do not ever do this again.
is about transcendence. And so this is the difference, in a sense, between prohibitionism and abolitionism. The one, Charles Fourier is the guy who invented the word feminism. He was plenty sort of problematic, but he had this vision for care communization, and he for him, there's a horizon there that really calls into question whether women will even exist after patriarchy. And that's the sort of that's the art.
There's a horizon that calls into question whether or not women will exist after patriarchy. Oh, really, Sophie? Oh, really? Hang on.
After patriarchy.
That really calls into question whether women will even exist after patriarchy. What does that mean? Sophie has just talked about transcending gender, which means going beyond the gender binary. And now she's saying that after we get rid of patriarchy, women might not even exist. So patriarchy is the gender hierarchy where men are on the top and they have access to all the money and all the power. Women are on the bottom because they are relegated to doing the unpaid labor of having the next generation of proletarian workers in the nuclear family. That's what the patriarchy is. They believe the patriarchy was created by capitalism because capitalism created the social constructs of men and women. That's what put men on the top, women on the bottom. That's the oppressor versus oppressed narrative. Once you get rid of patriarchy, that means you get rid of the hierarchy. And Sophie is saying This calls into question of if women will even continue to exist. It also calls into question of if men will continue to exist. Because the way they want to get rid of this hierarchy is by abolishing the categories of men and women altogether. You get rid of the categories, you get rid of the hierarchy. Does everyone understand? Well, there will be no gender. So no, people won't be gender queer. There'll be no gender. None. The abolition of all gender. The abolition of all gender categories. Nope. No. Nope. Do not go down that road because that's not where that road goes. Okay, I understand why you think that. That's not where that road goes at all. Completely different thing. Listen again. We'll go back to the transcendence thing.
For women, like, well, or perhaps also elevation, and the other one is about transcendence, and so this is the difference in a sense between prohibitionism and abolitionism. The one, Charles Fourier is the guy who invented the word feminism. He was plenty sort of problematic, but he had this vision for care communization, and he for him, there's a horizon there that really calls into question whether women will even exist after patriarchy, and that's the sort of that's the arc that I'm interested in, and the other one is sort of about quite an ontological certainty about what women are. There's not really this kind of openness towards a future where that word might not even be recognizable, right?
No, for sure.
So I thought it might be a contribution worthwhile to make in this moment where, fascism is very much, efflorescing across the planet, including in feminist forms, to help us as anti-fascist feminists, as anti-Zionist feminists, I hope, as trans feminists, trans-liberationists, not trans-liberal feminists, right? To say, look, maybe, who knows, maybe you don't have the kind of attachment to the label feminist that I, and I'm 37, do, right? I mean, I'm going to be honest, like, I think part of this was working out whether
Sophie's only 37. Sophie, I thought you were older than that. No offense. I am older than everyone. How is it possible that I am older than everyone and yet I look younger than so many people? It's not fair. Why am I older than everyone? This isn't fair.
Want to sort of stay here in the feminist label, because some of my comrades are like, that label doesn't, do much for me. I haven't lived well in the house of feminism. I think of myself as a, I don't know, like a queer liberationist or whatever, in a sense, that's fine. But for what it's worth, I think it's worth sticking with feminism because of its ability to illuminate something about capitalism. The sufficiently radical critique of capital that we need, I think, does get described by something I call feminism, because it is the anti-work insight, the insight that, as my friend and comrade Emma Heaney says, it's a lie that human flourishing inheres in the production of surplus value, as we know. And it is, in a sense, feminism that tells us about this priority of life making over accumulation, and teaches us that to be truly anti-capitalist is also to be anti-work, not to simply try and reverse the priority of, I don't know, workers over bosses, for example, but to...
So what does Sophie mean when she's saying anti-work in the context of feminism and patriarchy and abolish the family and all that stuff? What do you guys think? Pop quiz. What does Sophie mean explicitly when she says anti-work in reference to abolish the family and feminism and the patriarchy and all of those things? What does she mean? What is she advocating for? No more Well, okay, yeah, no more unpaid labor of motherhood. That's one of the things. It's not the only thing. Don't just say anti-capitalism. Don't be lazy. Come on. That's not what I'm asking. You guys know it. What is she talking about when she says the work of feminism? Gestational labor. Yup. What else could she be talking about? One of the ways to get rid of the patriarchy is to decouple gender from those who participate in gestational labor. Bro, I'm going to give you the same advice I gave to the other person that we banned a little while ago. You need to listen. You're not listening. You're not learning. You don't know what you're talking about. Welcome. I'm glad you're new here. That's fine. But I need you to listen. I need you to not fucking talk right now. And I need you to listen to what is being said. One of the things that they could mean is decoupling gender from giving birth. Okay. You're not doing what I'm asking you to do. This is your last warning before I put you in a timeout. How are they decoupling gender from giving birth? How are they saying it's not just going to be women who are performing the unpaid reproductive labor? Yep. Centralized surrogacy, biobags. Exactly. Birthing outside the womb. Exactly. Thank you.
But to literally, again, abolitionistly sort of, supersede the entire situation. So I'm sort of hoping that by showing, hey, if you are attached to feminism, as I am, as a label, you don't have to kind of stay confused and demobilized and disarmed by the fact that there are so many people ranged against us, on the other side of the barricades, who are saying fervently that they are feminists and sometimes have receipts to point to about lineages and movements, genealogies that they kind of hearken back to. That shouldn't necessarily give us pause, because you know what? There have been, as I show, over 200 years, there have been, fascists in the feminist camp. And more than simply saying they've been in bed with each other, they've been, instrumentalized by each other, la, la, la. I'm saying something quite scary, which is that feminism has been one of fascism's forms of appearance.
Feminism has been one of fascism's forms of appearance. So is this where the term birthing persons comes from, to decouple gender from labor? Exactly. Exactly. The idea that men can have babies too is decoupling gender from giving birth or reproductive labor. Exactly.
In the
For
past,
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there have always been anti-fascist feminisms fighting them, driving them off the streets. And so this is the undercommons of feminism I want to make palpable and available again to us,
Yeah. That's really illuminating. I think like what you were talking about, how abolition as a process is not just, obviously, as like Ruth Wilson Gilmore repeatedly says, that it's a world making process. It's not just a deletion thing. And I think like also the process of, not just the proletarians reversing the relationship between the bourgeoisie and the proletarian, but rather like that process of oppressing class out of existence being part of the abolitionist framework that is tied to what we would understand as, like gender abolition, the abolition of like prostitution, the abolition of work, in reclaiming or in identifying how people who say that they are like gender abolitionists are very often like TERFs, people who say that they, like you said, people who say that they want to abolish prostitution are very often like carceral feminists. But like part of what the impetus of reclaiming both the label feminist and abolitionist means is like holding on to the the strands that exist within them, ultimately about transforming our society in such a fundamental way that isn't just like tweaking what's already there. Part of the enemy feminisms that you do identify in Full Surrogacy Now, your first book, you know, like the as you said, the unconvincing liberal feminists, like, oh, we're women helping women, you know, you do a case study about this Indian woman who is a like business owner, NGO type of figure, and the way that she treats her staff, her employees. And you look at that, and you also look at the sort of the rhetoric surrounding what surrogacy is, right? Like, you know, selling wombs, like baby trafficking, you know, all this sort of like feminist language surrounding the kind of like holiness of women's bodies and how it's being like trafficked into this commoditized form of like labor exploitation, when in reality the natural birth experience, or like the non-commoditized birth experience, is somehow like a good, you know, like as if these two things are not part of a really just, you know, one and the same. It's it's this demand on the reproductive body in this really labor intensive way, one being compensated and one being not. And I think that's why like the title Full Surrogacy Now is so compelling as well, because it's like, yeah, we're not just saying like surrogacy boo bad, because anyone can say that. Like anyone can say, oh, I'm against surrogacy, I'm against prostitution, I'm against racism, I'm against homophobia, like, but what does that actually mean to you, and what does that do for the people who are living now in these conditions, and what does it mean on the other side of that question? Like what do people who aren't surrogates but do give birth do then in relationship? Like are we putting them against each other? But anyway, all that to say that I think like part of what Full Surrogacy Now really articulates is how there is a real type of shock factor, this like, oh my God, like this terrible thing is happening in the world and we're just letting it happen, we need to get on this right now, that you talk about it more extensively in Enemy Feminisms, in describing the history of like white slavery, the whole institution of trafficking, or how we understand like sex trafficking. And I was curious about whether you wanted to like expand on that more, because I
just want to point out, and I'm actually looking forward to Sophie's explanation here, but Sophie is not saying sex trafficking as a positive thing. Okay? So again, this is not about the rights pedophilia fetish. This is not what this is about, and I think you're about to hear her say that.
Noticing this, I was reading a lot of Enemy Feminisms while I was traveling, and in every bathroom stall in the airports, it's always like, are you being trafficked? Text this number. And I was like, you know, reading Enemy Feminism, and I'm like, this is really interesting that like the FBI is demanding that I text them or whatever. When in the context of what, you know, white slavery or like sex trafficking and these conspiracies, and also the rhetoric surrounding the trafficking of women's bodies in the gestational labor sense. So I don't know, what are your thoughts on
Sophie,
on
what
that,
are your
the lineage
thoughts
between that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I suppose one of the first things to say is that it might seem kind of trivial, but when we, you know, the names we come up with for the situation that women are in are quite important, right? Or the names we come up with for the emergency, you know, of gender violence. So trafficking, or, you know, white slavery, or, you know, prostitution, or what have you. I really think what we need to notice is what very low key gets downgraded as the site of violence. You know, so when you're saying trafficking, is it possible that the very much more banal everyday violence of the wage, of the, you know, just of normal jobs, you know, gets pushed out of sight? When you say, you know, womb brothel or whatever, do you know, the everyday violence of the sort of unwaged domestic sphere, or the social factory, slides a little bit out of sight, right?
Sophie seems to be making the argument that having kids in the nuclear family is on the same level as being sex trafficked, which is, I'm not sure, her best argument, but I guess let's see where she's going.
When you talk about stranger danger, you're pushing out of sight the much more statistically important kind of rapist or child sexual abuser in the family, and so on and so forth, right? So
it's not funny, but it's like these are Sophieisms. So the argument being made is, and we'll listen to this again, that the focus on sex trafficking, well, Sophie is not saying sex trafficking is good. She doesn't think it's good. But what she's saying is that the constant focus on sex trafficking is taking away and distracting from the fact that women having babies in the nuclear family is a form of trafficking that is far more prolific and far more impactful than people who are being actually sex trafficked, because it impacts more people. Yeah, and well, yes, and Sophie does believe that the nuclear family is the primary place that most people will experience abuse, which is another reason why she wants to abolish it. Let's just go back and listen to her. We're gonna listen to her extrapolate this out. I'm gonna go back to the beginning when she starts talking. Okay.
I suppose one of the first things to say is that it might seem kind of trivial, but when we, the names we come up with for the situation that women are in are quite important, right? Or the names we come up with for the emergency, of gender violence. So trafficking, or, white slavery, or, prostitution, or what have you. I really think what we need to notice is what very low key gets downgraded as the site of violence. So when you're saying trafficking, is it possible that the very much more banal everyday violence of the wage, of the just of normal jobs, gets pushed out of sight when you say, womb brothel or whatever? The everyday violence of the sort of unwaged domestic sphere, or the social factory, slides a little bit out of sight, right? When you talk about stranger danger, you're pushing out of sight the much more statistically important kind of rapist or child sexual abuser in the family, and so on and so forth, right? So, how do we come up with a sufficiently kind of subtle and careful and complex politics that enables us to follow sex workers' lead in, combating real trafficking, while also kind of rejecting all of the philanthro-capitalist, feminist, humanitarian, carceral apparatuses that exist to quite damagingly and harmfully sort of rescue victims against their will, often returning them to situations they were, in fact, with some degree of agency, fleeing in the first place.
Oh, holy shit!
Choosing...
Sophie! Sophie is making the argument that in combating sex trafficking, we are taking people out of situations that they want to be in and returning them to the family, which was probably the site of their abuse from the beginning. She's saying that people are voluntarily in sex trafficking situations because they were trying to escape the capitalist violence of the nuclear family. I'm pretty sure that's her argument. Sophie Listen, this really pisses me off too, because I know for absolute certain that Sophie does not support the sexualization of children. I know this. I've heard her talk about it. But it's like, this really pisses me off, Sophie, because I defend you. I make sure people know that you're not a pedophile when I have you on tape saying things that if I cut you out of context, it would make you seem like a pedophile, but I don't do that because I defend you, Sophie, and I make sure people know that you don't want to sexualize kids every time you're talking about children's liberation or writing a book about fucking children's liberation, and then you fucking come out and say something like, when you're taking people out of sex trafficking situations, you're taking them out of a situation they want to be in and returning them to the nuclear family, which was the source of their capitalist violence abuse in the first place. Sophie, you make it so fucking hard to defend you sometimes. Again. Go back.
You know, womb brothel or whatever. You know, the everyday violence of the sort of unwaged domestic sphere or the social factory slides a little bit out of sight, right? When you talk about stranger danger, you know, you're pushing out of sight the much more statistically important kind of rapist or child sexual abuser in the family, and so on and so forth, right? So, you know, how do we come up with a sufficiently kind of subtle and careful and complex politics that enables us to follow sex workers' lead in, you know, combating real trafficking, while also kind of rejecting all of the, you know, philanthro-capitalist, feminist, humanitarian, carceral apparatuses that exist to quite damagingly and harmfully sort of rescue victims against their will, often returning them to situations they were, in fact, with some degree of agency, fleeing in the first place, or choosing to get out of, even if then other forces got involved and certain kinds. You know, the situation with trafficking is often way more gray than the word and its, you know, policy languages encourages us to think, right? And it is almost a subject position by, you know, that is voided of agency, right? The trafficked person, right? There's that it no longer becomes a question what she actually wants, right? It's just you know, rescue her, put her in a situation where she can have dignified, you know, labor as the real feminist horizon for her humanity. Exactly, dignified. Okay, so yeah.
Sophie is saying that by rescuing people from being sex trafficked, we are taking the people out of a situation that they have voluntarily put themselves into. They put themselves into the sex trafficking position because they were trying to escape the violence of the nuclear family, and therefore they wound up being sex trafficked. But Sophie believes that sex traffic is a horrible word because it takes away the agency of the individual, and when they're rescued, quote unquote rescued from being sex trafficked, they're returned to the nuclear family to do the quote unquote dignified, sarcastically said, work of engaging in unpaid reproductive labor within the nuclear family. She's making the argument that being sex trafficked is preferable to doing the unpaid labor of having children within the nuclear family. Sophie, this is pretty wild, even for you. I'm not sure you thought through this before saying this on the internet 3 days ago, Sophie. And now I'm conflicted. Now I'm having... I've defended Sophie. so many times, and she said crazy shit. I need to listen to this again. I need to decide what I want to do about this. But Sophie, I'm really not happy that you put me in this position of saying this on the internet and then forcing me to decide whether or not I want to blow this clip up and make it go viral. Yeah, I'm having some real issues with Sophie saying that being sex trafficked is preferable to having kids within the nuclear family. I'm having some feelings there, Soph. Okay, yeah, bad Sophie. Bad. Sophie, you need to come out of the echo chamber and realize you're saying this shit on the internet. Again, not yet, not cool. Not cool. Sophie, be better. Be better than this. We believe in you, Sophie. We love you. We've defended you. I've defended your honor on multiple occasions. It's very Sophie, we're not mad. We're just disappointed. Okay?
Everyday violence of the wage of the just of normal jobs gets pushed out of sight. When you say womb brothel or whatever, the everyday violence of the sort of unwaged domestic sphere or the social factory slides a little bit out of sight, right? When you talk about stranger danger, you're pushing out of sight the much more statistically important kind of rapist or child sexual abuser in the family, and so on and so forth, right? So, how do we come up with a sufficiently kind of subtle and careful and complex politics that enables us to follow sex workers' lead in combating real trafficking, while also kind of rejecting all of the philanthro-capitalist, feminist, humanitarian carceral apparatuses that exist to quite damagingly and harmfully sort of rescue victims against their will, often returning them to situations they were, in fact, with some degree of agency fleeing in the first place, or choosing to get out of, even if then other forces got involved and certain kinds. The situation with trafficking is often way more gray than the word and its policy languages encourages us to think, right? And it is almost a subject position that is voided of agency, right? The trafficked person, right? It no longer becomes a question what she actually wants, right? It's just rescue her, put her in a situation where she can have dignified labor as the real feminist horizon for her humanity. Exactly, dignified. Okay, so yeah, and then this, as you say, has a lot of resonances across the decades and across the centuries even, because after the first wave of abolitionism, as in slavery, real chattel slavery abolitionism, started to sort of wane, right? There were a lot of different abolitionisms across the world, a lot of campaigns. There were sugar boycotts. There were sort of abolitionists who were led by former enslaved people. And there were plenty of abolitionists who were doing quite different kinds of politics, not even anti-racist politics at all. Some people perhaps don't quite know this or learn this or think this through, but you did not have to be remotely anti-racist, actually, really, to oppose chattel slavery. Plenty of people were quite committed to white supremacy, even as they campaigned, to free the slaves or whatever. So, in this kind of context, as certain kinds of legislation supposedly announced the freedom of the formerly enslaved, so people like Ruth Wilson Gilmore and all the abolitionist scholars insist that even that slavery of chattel slavery is not concluded, it's not been achieved, it's not done, it's not over, right? It's not been positively superseded from below, this thing called slavery. It's economic infrastructures linger, right? There are traces of it anyway, not to digress too far, but at this moment where certain types of actually prohibitionist but self-described abolitionist politics were announcing their victory, there was this real sort of tidal wave of attention to a new slave, right? And this is much discussed in scholarship about feminist history, and I think it's quite tricky to get the exact nuance right. Like when feminism started talking about woman and her condition, and this was, yes, a very sort of racialized white, and also very sort of Western and encoded as bourgeois kind of womanhood.
Capitalist.
When they said this is the new slave we need to worry about that no one noticed, what exactly is the critique? If you were to say that was completely outrageous per se to make this kind of analogy, you're dismissing huge swathes, just enormous swathes of discourse and activism. And of course, a lot of leftists were making the analogy to slavery when they said wage slave. It has to be understood, how widespread the metaphor and analogy. Today, by the way, very, very, very often anti-surrogacy prohibitionists say that contract pregnancy workers are slaves. And it's a very confused discourse. Sometimes you get the phrase enslaved by their own hand. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
A kind of literal nonsense,
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I'm just kind of gesturing towards the ways in which we might not want to linger too long on the sort of like, this is outrageous. Everyone was doing it, So at the end of the 19th century, you really get an uptick. And I mean, Mary Wollstonecraft, a century before that, had already started going in this direction. Oh, look, what a controversial and sort of brilliant move. Gentlemen of the empires, you have endorsed, the liberation of the African man from his shackles. But what if you had not even noticed that there's an even less deserving of slavery slave in your very home, your wife? And I mean, this is the rhetorical gesture, really, that launches a hell of a lot.
Being a wife is literally slavery, according to Sophie. Again, Sophie?
Century, you really get an uptick. And I mean, Mary Wollstonecraft, a century before that, had already started going in this direction. Oh, look, what a controversial and sort of brilliant move. Gentlemen of the empires, you have endorsed, the liberation of the African man from his shackles. But what if you had not even noticed that there's an even less deserving of slavery slave in your very home, your wife? And I mean, this is the rhetorical gesture, really, that launches a hell of a lot.
Sophie, I believe, is in a polyamorous relationship with both a man and a woman. So no, I don't think Sophie's married because, again, remember, socialists and communists do not even believe in the institution of marriage because they believe that the institution of marriage, whether it be gay marriage or straight marriage, is a form of propertied relations that is blessed by the state. So they aren't really inclined to marriage. Polyamory is one of the ways they're trying to queer the nuclear family. It's one of the ways they're trying to queer relationships. And I'm fairly certain, I don't know this for sure, but I follow Sophie on Instagram and I know she has a longtime girlfriend. I think she also has a boyfriend though, because I see the boy popping up every once in a while, and sometimes Sophie is kind of naked around the boy because Sophie sometimes posts naked pictures of herself on her Instagram, and so I'm pretty sure that's a boyfriend of some sort, and it's some sort of like polyamorous thing because Sophie is the type of communist that would not believe in being in a monogamous relationship because monogamy is a form of property. Just listen to her say the bit about the wife again.
African man from his shackles. But what if you had not even noticed that there's an even less deserving of slavery slave in your very home, your wife? And I mean, this is the rhetorical gesture, really, that launches a hell of a lot of activism. And so many different organizations, from the Women's Christian Temperance Union, to all the different white slavery combating, vice combating, pro-temperance sorts of infrastructures, were making this kind of move, saying, if we were able to care about the Black man, surely we should be able to care about woman, the most degraded slave of all, who has been, enslaved so much longer and with nobody caring, So this was the sort of idea. And white slavery in particular was a phrase that got whipped up. Initially, there was some this phrase was, in a sense, the phrase that heralded the transformation of something not altogether.
All right. So you were speaking gibberish in my chat earlier. You were given a timeout. You've obviously learned nothing in your timeout. I don't think you're here to actually learn. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put you in a 24-hour timeout so we no longer have to hear you in the chat. And if you come back and you continue to cause chaos in my chat, you will just be permanently removed from the channel. So you're now going in permanent timeout. We're not going to hear from you for the rest of the stream. And if you ever come back, don't do that shit again.
Bad in feminism, sometimes sex worker led, sometimes anti-state kind of initiatives to stop the state being a pimp, the British government in the UK, and then also in its colonies in India, for example, was basically operating a system where any woman suspected of being a common prostitute, quote unquote, a legal category that existed, could just basically be arrested and incarcerated psychiatrically or medically, and held and forcibly, examined for sexual diseases, and and then made available to the British Army's sexual needs again. Basically a sort of organized system of of prostitution that was operated through hospitals and through medical authorities in tandem with the police. And so this was something that certain feminist left liberals, such as Josephine Butler, were fighting, at the end of the 19th century. But then the sort of, as often happens, as I'm kind of suggesting in my book, a kind of reactionary counter-revolution occurred internally in the movement, and that really, perhaps that's not the right language. I'm beginning to wonder if it's better to just talk in terms of defeat, because what sort of superseded it was a real enemy feminism that was much more interested in controlling what women did rather than preventing the state from incarcerating them. And this is what Josephine Butler even says in her letters. She says, I'm shocked that there are these new women, activists all over the place who think that they should be prescribing what women do with their bodies, rather than trying to take power away from politicians and cops and husbands, and you can really literally see this kind of take place. So white slavery is the phrase that, although Josephine Butler did kind of, deal
traffic
with
in
it.
this.
Yeah, she did traffic in this. Yeah, it really is the name for the moral panic that takes off. And it's such a popular thing, there are tabloid sensations, there are stories about, small children being sold into this slavery for pennies, and it's interesting to trace, who the villain in this sort of story is, and the parallels to things like QAnon and Save Our Children and the sort of Pizzagate type imaginary are so very obvious. And I'm skipping there quite a few because, of course, sex panics and moral panics recur more frequently throughout the 20th century. But at one point, in certain contexts, economically speaking, it depends what's kind of going on. But it might be an aristocrat who's the main figure, a horrible old man who's very, very rich, who's kind of, sucking the blood of the little virginal Anglo-Saxon girl. And then in other contexts, it becomes just, a xenophobic thing. It's like brown men, with their pimping rings and
their pimping rings.
White slavery, yeah. That was a truly, apparently, historians seem agreed, fictional phenomenon, and yet it was treated as though it was completely real, just thousands and thousands of young girls sort of kidnapped, and there was never any evidence at all, actually. Of course, the site...
Is Sophie saying that sex trafficking is completely made up? And there was a fiction. Sophie, fuck you. Fuck you. Seriously.
The historians seem agreed, fictional phenomenon, and yet it was treated as though it was completely real, just thousands and thousands of young girls sort of kidnapped, and there was never any evidence at all, actually. Of course, the
never
site
any
of
evidence.
Sexual violence is very much the sort of normal, endorsed, sanctioned, legally, accorded so much impunity kinship structure of social life and its associated institutions. The figures of the teacher, the doctor, the judge, the cop, the husband, the father. This is what feminism should be focusing on, not stranger danger. And that's been the fight, in a sense, internally. Where was the original question kind of taking us? Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, what were you thinking then, in terms of what you'd like to see for anti-fascist feminism today in light of the extremely sort of conspiratorial, and sex panic riven character of the present?
Yeah, that what you're saying, the moral panic of it all is so interesting, because I think there's this sort of discourse that where we see all these different girl boss type small businesses and whatnot popping up, or different self-defense or weapons manufacturers being our primary target audience. Our consumer base are women who want to protect themselves. So we sell mace, we sell these what are these ring things, we sell these things little tasers for when you want to protect yourself while you're walking alone at night. And I think this is such an interesting area of girl bossery and getting the pink dollar or whatever, because you said, and any committed abolitionist feminist, or really any feminist who has looked at the data, knows it's not really a stranger in the alleyway. The vast majority of the time, it's your ex-boyfriend, it's your pastor, it's your uncle, those are the people that put you in the most danger. And yet, to disrupt that or to counter that, you would have to destabilize this form, the kinship relationships, the structures of society, of organizing society, families.
So the argument is, because you are more likely to be sexually abused in the home than you are to be sex trafficked, then that is a reason that we need to abolish the nuclear family, because the nuclear family structure is not protecting you from being sex trafficked in your own home, essentially.
Religious institutions and educational institutions, you would have to attack every aspect of how we understand and navigate through society in a way that is so much more difficult than dealing with the reality of many types of intimate violence happening at every level. I think the focus, the moral panic around trafficking, which I think, it's the contemporary version of white slavery, where trafficking as people understand it doesn't really exist. Like you said, when girls leave the home and end up in trafficking situations, end up getting pimped, it's usually because they're escaping a situation that is really, really bad. And then any intervention into that is just putting them back into the original situation that they were escaping from.
Again, they're you idiots are leaving me no choice but to clip this and make this go viral on the internet. You are literally saying that when people are being sex trafficked, they're choosing that situation because they are escaping the violence of the nuclear family and taking them out of the sex trafficking situation and returning them to the family is a worse scenario. Like, you're saying that is a worse scenario for them. This is an example of people who have been in an echo chamber far too long. Sophie, listen, Sophie. We haven't been hard enough on you, Sophie. I feel like this is my fault. I've been too nice to Sophie because I like Sophie and I've wanted Sophie to come on the channel and talk to me, and I've defended Sophie even though I harangue her on the internet and I make fun of her and all this stuff and I call her my internet girlfriend and say that, but it's gone too far, Sophie. This has gone too far. You need to feel the weight of the fucking internet coming down on your ass for this, because you guys are in an echo chamber and you're spinning each other up in an echo chamber because you're not fucking listening to anyone else, and you're assuming that everyone in the world agrees with your crazy ideas because you're on a book tour right now and you're only talking to people who agree with your crazy ideas. But there are a lot of people in the world who do not agree with your crazy ideas and do not think that taking people out of sex trafficking situations is a worse scenario than being in the nuclear family. That, Sophie, this is because we have not made Sophie go viral enough on the internet. This is our fault. We're going to rectify this. It's going to be fine. I've been given no fucking choice in the matter, Sophie. You're making me do this, and I don't want to do this. But I will.
I think the focus, the moral panic around trafficking, which I think, it's the contemporary version of white slavery, where trafficking as people understand it doesn't really exist. Like you said, when girls leave the home and end up in trafficking situations, end up getting pimped, it's usually because they're escaping a situation that is really, really bad. And then any intervention into that is just putting them back into the original situation that they were escaping from. And so, and also, I was reading Imperfect Victims by Lee Goodmark, survivor, abolition, or what's it called? It's decriminalizing. I'm forgetting the whole subheader, but
yeah. Hang on. We got a member chat from Maria. Thank you, Maria. At the end of the day, we're on opposite sides of the barricades. As she said, all's fair in love and war. I vote to... Yeah, we're going to have to clip this. We're going to have to fuck it. I didn't want to do it, but Sophie has put me in a position now where I have to, and it's not fair, and she shouldn't have done this. And I'm just saying, Sophie, that maybe you forgot what it means to say things on the internet because you haven't gone massively viral in a while, but we can change that.
We talked to Lee Goodmark actually in our book club meeting a couple months ago, and I was asking her questions after, and she made a really interesting distinction between what we would understand as sex trafficking and then the sort of volition, the voluntary kind of sex work that survivors do engage in, where part of what the institute, what having been trafficked looks like, is that you do lack a form of agency or safety or an ability to protect yourself, because that's in another person's hands. Whereas those things are you are weighing your options of is there an option of wage work that would pay me better and have better working conditions than doing sex work? No. Okay, then I'm going to do this, right? There's a decision-making process there. In that question, I was rereading Right-Wing Women, actually, by Andrea Dworkin. And because I'm trying to write something about the discourse around Chapel Roan right now. Oh my God, it's been pissing me off. And I was quoting a lot of your work as well. And I think there's a really interesting chapter in Right-Wing Women where Dworkin is basically talking about how the the technologification, making like birth and gestation this like tech enabled, doctor enabled thing is this scary thing that, like, what did she call it, gestational genocide or something like that. It is something that like we need to like fervently oppose, which is interesting now looking back at it 40 years later, and you're like, yeah, IVF is like a very normal thing. And like people, this is not something that we really consider when it comes to like feminism necessarily. Like it's kind of out of the question, but at least from what I understand, I mean, it is like it is a it's like a multi-million-dollar industry. You know, it's capitalizing off of this desire for like safety and, you know, contributing to the reproduction of the family, the same way that I think like these self-defense mechanisms that companies are selling are like, you know, like protect yourself, you know, hunker down with your family, like construct this safety nest, as if that safety nest is not itself, you know, the site of the most violence. But in the lines of like Andrea Dworkin and all this sort of thing, I really notice, especially in Enemy Feminisms, how you really like lean into the sort of Marxist thing of critiquing all that exists. You open with, you know, a critique of Jenny Holzer. You in your chapter where you really go after Catherine McKinnon and Andrea Dworkin, and also the sort of like, and within that, the sex panics of the 70s, 80s, 90s, and the sort of the sex wars between the lesbian feminists and the butch femmes, and, you know, the drag artists and the sex workers. And yeah, and then I also saw you recently had an article out where you were talking about Sally Rooney's work and how she engages with the family and affection and love and intimacy. So I'm curious, like, this desire to, or how your work is always like critiquing these things. Does part of that come from the you know, engaging with these ideas and these, I can see in your writing, like you engage with these ideas in a really like thorough manner, like you're addressing them not just for at the surface level of like what their ideas were, but also like the ways that they've played out, or like why something is wrong. But yeah, how did you identify the certain things that you want to critique? Like where does the impetus to like be like, okay, this is a thing that I see in pop culture or society or the world, and like I want to go after this, or like in feminist scholarship, and then you identify that and go. But yeah, I mean, that's sort of what I'm curious about. But anyways, anything that I said, feel free to pick on, because I'm very curious.
Yeah. Yes, gosh, it's funny. I don't know if it's I don't want to be defensive. I don't really see myself as critiquing Jenny Holzer. I think I certainly have no beef with her as an artist. I think that thing she said is interesting to me as a jumping off point. I hope it doesn't come across as me, it's an interesting thing that some of us say, right? This opening of the book, like women are not horrible. I hope it's an example of sort of loving and immanent critique. It's not a critique of a body of work in this case. Although, as you say, there are other cases where, as with Sally Rooney, a wonderful comrade, who has been an absolute example for other artists in terms of solidarity with Palestinian liberation, is someone, that I'm looking at in terms of the interesting sorts of logics of initially quite sort of Marxist, feminist, anti-familial desire that her characters espouse, the way that gets folded into a sort of a utopian couple form, ultimately at the end of her narratives. I think that's worth thinking about, not to say fuck that, not to say there's nothing, but to think about how the horizon of the possible is defined in realist literature. The third rubric that you've sort of invoked here with Dworkin, that's a completely different story for me. I've published what I have been reassured, and I strongly believe is a very loving, as well as antagonistic kind of approach to this figure's evolution as a thinker. I have found that it's a pretty hostile terrain. There's a 6-year Dworkin revival going on. I mean, I knew this. This is why I'm intervening. I'm not
multiple
asking
times. Yeah,
for
they have.
Sort of kindness, I suppose.
Actually, Sophie not only has Red May had Sophie on for years now. Sophie's actually doing a talk in Seattle at a bookstore for a Red May event, but they're not streaming it, sadly. So she's actually speaking for Red May this year. Play.
I think for me, Dworkin is a figure who becomes committed to what is for me an anti-liberatory or enemy feminist politics. But it is not at all a foregone conclusion in the trajectory of her work. And that's kind of part of the tragedy for me. I think she's a very rich figure to scrutinize and think with and against, precisely because of the way that her early formation as what I would call an abolitionist, and also, as it happens, an erotic maximalist and someone who was a sex worker and who made all kinds of calls of a very sort of 1968 variety for a sort of politicized mass transsexualism, as she called it, a politicized transvestism, explorations of multi-species eros, right? She provocatively says, "I have in effect advocated fucking animals," in 1971, and smashing the incest taboo, she calls for, right, in the final chapter of Woman Hating, and all of these things are things she then recants. Janice Raymond, the author of The Transsexual Empire, as well as some other, very queerphobic, transphobic, enemy feminists have insisted on making sure, right, that Andrea Dworkin recanted all of the things she said in the final chapter of Woman Hating at the beginning of the 70s. And I think there has been an impulse in recent years.
Hey, thank you, mass genocide, for the beer money. I drank too much beer. I think part of the reason I'm kind of sluggish today is I drank 3 beers yesterday. And apparently I can't drink 3 beers anymore. Apparently that is just too much. I haven't really been drinking that much at all recently. And so apparently 3 beers was a step too far. And now my entire body is rebelling against me. And I couldn't sleep last night at all. And it sucked. Anyway, but I appreciate the beer money.
Is to take Dworkin's partner John Stoltenberg's word for it that, as the Boston Review essay puts it, Andrea Dworkin was a trans ally. That piece circulates a lot. It gets kind of brandished around a lot. I find that quite perplexing. I don't think the opposite is the case. I don't think that Dworkin put a lot of energy into cis sexism, and that's cool. However, I think it is completely not defensible to claim that she was somehow a trans ally. She blurbed The Transsexual Empire effusively. She helped Raymond write it. I think at best she was ambivalent, because indeed, she recanted those positions from the very early 70s. And those are the ones that Stoltenberg points to when he says that she was in some way pro-trans. He's pointing to the point in time before which Dworkin became, Dworkin, in a sense, the one that we know, the one before, the one after. The one that I think is so interesting, at the point where she's still trafficking in a kind of critical utopianism. And she says this herself. She says, "I used to be a hopeful radical. Now I have seen what my dreams came to, pornography." And she quite consciously espouses a sort of giving up.
I know. I was so pissed off.
a dangerous sort of revolutionary possibilities that mattered to her once upon a time. This is something I think is quite explicitly there on the record. It seems that pointing to it is seen as quite bad taste or bad faith or unacceptable.
From
or
what
rude.
angle? Like from the Dworkinite Defense Army, or like the like rabid like radical feminists all need to die? You know what I mean? Like what I guess from what perspective do you see that like the most, I guess? Yeah.
Yes, sorry. Perhaps this is also part of my answer to your question. How I choose people to engage with was part of your question. I think I spend very little time actually engaging with anti-feminists. I think my entire, bookshelf of my references are people who describe themselves as feminists, right? Enemy feminists, in my view, or comrade feminists or whatever, but overwhelmingly women as well. So I think it sometimes doesn't even occur to me that you might have understood me to be talking about the people who simply want to crush and eliminate feminism from the earth. But no, I'm talking about the Dworkin revivalists. Yeah. So anyway, we can go more into that if you want. I have another piece coming out that takes a different approach to the significance of this ongoing Dworkin revival, which has to do with the telos of Dworkin's oeuvre, because it kind of ended up with her longest, most sort of scholarly, most heavily referenced book is a book that no one talks about when they talk about Dworkin or anthologize her or whatever. And it's Scapegoat, her book about the Shoah and the Nakba, which is an analogy that she entertains and then actually rejects on the basis that Israel's crimes are bad. She's smart enough and honest enough as a person, really interesting kind of mind, to be able to look pretty straight head on, at what Israel is as a project and
what
its
is it,
constitutive
Sophie?
violence, but what she quite chillingly argues over this extremely long, as I say, book, which is really, I think, an important one that you can't just leave out when you talk about Dworkin, because it's the one where she finally figures out what she thinks women should do. What she says is that really Israel's violence is justified in the same way that a woman killing her rapist is justified. And she says, and that's extraordinary, right? And she says that women should ultimately do Israel. They should do woman Israel. And it's obviously not something that she lays out in particular detail because it's bananas. But, the clear and sort of suggestion which she is entertaining here and gesturing very vaguely towards is that that some kind of apartheid system with men having no property rights or perhaps no physical presence within a territory would be the only way, really, for
kind
women
of
to be safe.
Anti-utopian kind of like dream, where it's like this is like the hypothetical reality that we can like move to, but it's one that like is so violent. And one of my favorite Dworkin quotes is when she's like, there's no shortage of kitchen knives in this country. Like, if we were not committed to feminism, like the only reason why we're committed to feminism is because like we think that you as in the oppressors, as in men, husbands, etc., you are able to identify our humanity and stop killing us. Like we think that if we really didn't think that you could change, then like we would just kill you. And it's so interesting that in your analysis, in your summary of Scapegoat, she kind of like takes this, she just goes the other way, and she's just like, well, it's over for y'all.
Yeah, I think that's right. Exactly. I think at her strongest, she's able to sort of talk about what she actually, a little bit mind-blowingly calls men's liberationism. It's bound up in the struggle against patriarchy. You know, I think there are moments where that's what she's saying, and that's where it is compelling to talk about her as someone who understands us to be a multi-sexed species, you know. But within her, there is this very powerful other drive, which is basically to jettison all of that and to entertain something like a settler colonialism of sex, like a genocidal sort of sex nationalism on the Israel model. And I, you know, yeah, I'm very
So
happy.
Sophie just called the Israel model the settler colonist model. This is why they don't like Israel, because they believe that Israel stole the indigenous land from the Palestinians. Israel are the settler colonists, the capitalists, the bourgeois. The Palestinians are in the uprising against their settler colonist oppressors. And Sophie is being critical because she's talking about a person who's suggesting that women should build a women's only empire in the same way that Israel has built the Jewish empire. And so Sophie doesn't like when Israel does it. Sophie also doesn't like when it is suggested that all men should be excluded from territory either, which I guess is consistent at least.
For people to criticize and disagree with me in terms of my conclusions, but it seems that much of the, you know, fight about this is sort of like, if you criticize Dworkin, you're a revenge pornographer or a men's rights activist or a
Right.
you know, which I find a little that doesn't seem so generative to me.
For
obviously.
sure. I mean, I think like I really like how you write about like pleasure and like eroticism and this sort of like delight in the face of a type of feminism that demands that you reject those things, like demands that like we need to be serious, like we need to hate these people, and it's like, you know, I get that tone, or I get that. I see that, and I see the rah-rahism of it all, and I also feel it. Like I really resonate with that whenever I see the many headlines about women getting honor killed or abused or tortured over years. I'm like, yeah, and I do think we should kill all men, actually. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I get this sense of like, oh my God, like this is so horrible. I hate this world. I want it to burn for women. But then like you kind of you do this really great thing where you identify like, well, but at the end of the day, like women love men. Like women want to be in safe, like loving relationships with people that they want to have sex with. Like, and so how do we like achieve that in a way that isn't fueled by the sort of like that like vengeful hate and rage that is really behind a lot of the prohibitionist like politics, the material manifestations of prohibition versus abolition, which is, I feel like, a lot of strong antagonism, like a real this one of the strongest emotions that people can have, which is like disgust, at porn, disgust at prostitution, disgust at surrogacy, like this, and then that being like feministified, or like, you know, instead of really thoroughly engaged with, which I think you work to do. But I don't know, what do you think have misidentified that at all, or is that part of the impetus in your writing?
Yeah. No, I mean, much of what you just said really resonates with me, Sunny. You know, I do, however, sort of fall down on the side of the commitment of the sex radicals, as they called themselves in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, to, you know, seeking ecstasy on the battlefield. Actually, that's a 19th century phrase that was then taken up by the sex radicals in the so-called sex wars, you know, which means, you know, as the phrase rather neatly conveys, that you agree with, let's say, Dworkin as we know her, to that it's a fucking Holocaust out here,
it's,
you know,
a Holocaust
of gender violence.
Of course,
you agree.
It is,
in fact, you nonetheless,
of
and this
course,
is a strategically, you know, respect-worthy position to continue seeking ecstasy, as at the same time as you fight, because, you know, the alternative is to retreat to a place of securitization and self-protection exclusively, that then leaves no dialectical momentum possible for the creation of a world worth actually living in, and that has no prefigurative dimension whatsoever, to the point that it's questionable what the point of living like that actually is, right? The consequences of this kind of insistence on a critical utopian position that can be characterized as, I don't know, unserious or somehow dismissive or inattentive to or denialist of the extent of women's unsafety in the world, and of women's suffering, and of women's
Unsafety.
death in the world, right? Is that you also become capable of being attentive to the ways in which, things like misogyny
Unsafety.
and what Dworkin would call gynocide, and patriarchy and so on are actually distributed not so neatly across the population. It's not just a case of responsibility for these evils belonging to men. It's simply not, right? And in Dworkin's amazing book, Right Wing Women, I think
I love it.
she gets, I however think, sometimes so close to sort of the necessity to reject a view of feminism as exclusively the sort of fight for women's interests, because she sees that woman
Not all
per
women.
se is a category that is too fractured and too unstable. And that's a really interesting dynamic in that book, because I think I just called it amazing, but I also think it has very, very revealing lacuna and moments of failure to give responsibility to women for history. And one of the kind of repetitions in her oeuvre is the insistence that women so far do not bear any responsibility for history, which, I very non-facetiously want to say is actually a pretty unfeminist epistemic gesture, right?
For sure.
To not give women that kind of credit for violence and oppressing.
Yeah. Well,
amongst other things, and so she really, things like fascist women, she actually at some point refuses to really finish thinking about. There are these moments where she pulls back because she can't really do it,
Yeah, and when Sophie says fascist women, she means anyone that's not anti-capitalist.
Because for her, as she says explicitly in Scapegoat, women have not made history, really. They might one day, but they so far haven't. And this is what you really need to think, I think, in order to coherently, and when you're as smart as Dworkin, maintain the sort of cultural feminist, sort of almost what I kind of call sex nationalist position, whereby it is a question of taking up the kitchen knives against all men, and yeah. So the violence is obviously real, and it is extremely gendered, and yet at the same time, we can't do that. We can't divide ourselves into these populations on this ontological level. We have to maintain the sort of dialectical openness to becoming something other than we are, collectively and individually and en masse. These categories, men and women, are something that, for someone like Monique Wittig, don't have any use for liberation, right? Someone like Monique Wittig.
I'm sorry, what? I'm sorry, what, Sophie? These categories of men and women don't have any use in liberation? Again?
This to becoming something other than we are, collectively and individually and en masse. These categories, men and women, are something that, for someone like Monique Wittig, don't have any use for liberation, right? Someone like Monique Wittig thinks we can't do anything liberatory with the category women. That's why for her, the word for someone who wants to be a person is lesbian, and it's this quite sort of eccentric, not very fashionable anymore kind of rejection, really, of woman as a rubric,
Well,
but I sort of get it, I sort of
yeah,
get why someone like Boutique is doing something like that, because otherwise you ultimately are in the business of creating innocence, of creating a category of innocence, for your side. And I think that's a really dangerous move. I would even go so far as to say it contains the kernels of a kind of fascistic logic.
for sure,
Fascistic
deposit yourself
logic.
or any population as intrinsically, inherently victim. Like victim in the question of Zionism, the perpetual victim card of the Holocaust, victim card, where like I've just recently finished The Holocaust Industry by Norman Finkelstein, which was a banger. Like it was so good, and it was also very funny. Like I think his deployment of like Jewish humor is so good, and also so interesting because it was published in 2000, and I'm like, okay, 9/11 is about to happen, and it's about to change the whole fabric of like how you understand geopolitics. But anyways, in thinking about that, like the perpetual victim card,
wait. These are the surprising moments that occur on Sophie streams, where we almost get a glimpse that Sophie and her friends are like this close to understanding the JQ. Like every once in a while, we've seen Sophie multiple times say, in Germany, they thought the Jews were both the communists and the bankers. And that is confusing to Sophie because Sophie is like this far away from understanding that they were actually both. They were both the communists and the bankers. But her point is like, how could they be both the communists and the bankers? Because then they'd be on both sides. She's like so close, yet so far. And it's like they hate Israel for all the same reasons, honestly, that the dissident right hates Israel. And I'm kind of wondering, are they this close to understanding that maybe some people, definitely not me, obviously not me, I would never say this, maybe some people kind of think the Jews did 9/11. Maybe, I'm just saying, I'm not saying I believe that. I'm just saying that some people on the internet believe that. It kind of sounds like they're really close.
very funny. Like I think his deployment of like Jewish humor is so good, and also so interesting because it was published in 2000, and I'm like, okay, 9/11 is about to happen, and it's about to change the whole fabric of like how you understand geopolitics. But anyways, in thinking about that, like the perpetual victim card, I mean, it's not even a card, the perpetual victim status of history and reality, that is very real in there as a way to defend against any sort of insane, like genocidal behavior or action. Is, I think, like you see that in a lot of the sort of radical feminist tradition, like that perspective. I was thinking about They Were Her Property by Stephanie E. Jones, I think, about women slave owners during the antebellum era. I read that like in 2020 or something, and I think like I was thinking about, and you were saying about how a lot of the writing and the discourse around white feminism and its failures isn't as generative as you would want it to be. And also like in understanding right-wing women as being like this really great book, but also shows really the theoretical shortcomings of a thinker like Dworkin. I think there's something interesting in sort of when you're talking about like the Dworkin revivalism that we're seeing right now, which is like, I mean, I was hanging out with Daphne in Chicago, and she was like, and I think she would make these like, and I think the fascist Dworkinites love the love the sheep aesthetic and the like waif thing, because they blah blah blah, like we would talk about this. But which is so funny. I love Dworkinite as an attribute to the sort of like online, like waifish, coquette Lana Del Rey, but Andrea Dworkin's also in there. I'm like, that's hilarious. Like, you need to get fat now. Like, you need to get fat immediately, actually. But also, I think like that sort of dialectical, like contradictory nature of assembling our feminist histories, either in this proto-fascist way, but or in like this really interesting revival of cultures and subcultures, like, for example, what you were saying about Monique Wittig, the whole concept of, or like, a woman is not born, she is made, and also that lesbians are not women. Like these concepts are things that me and my lesbian friends, many of whom are like trans and non-binary, have been thinking about and talking about for years now. And like, I think so. I'm 22.
Oh, come on.
And
what the hell? Why did it bring up a big warning on the screen? What the fuck just happened? What the hell? How did I get? Oh, because there's an. Okay, there it is. Okay. The reason I stopped it is because she was like, all of my lesbian friends, the ones who are trans and non-binary, which means they're all men and none of them are actually lesbians.
women, like these concepts are things that me and my lesbian friends, many of whom are like trans and non-binary, have been thinking about
Not
and
women.
talking about for years now.
Not
and like
women.
I think
At
so. I'm
all.
22, and like a lot of my friends that I went to high school with, or who I went to college with, are really interested in this idea, and in fact like claim it really strongly, right? Like, I am not a woman, I'm a lesbian. Like, I am something that, because I don't engage in heteropatriarchy in this way, that doesn't make me a woman in that real way. And I think like people are really attached to that contemporarily in a way that I think also makes them a little bit antagonistic towards the label of feminist, or the identity of feminist, or even using the idea or the label or term of woman in a politicized manner, because of how attached it has been to this sort of like angel of the house but feminist rendition of things, when your whole identity and your whole life is rejecting that status in and of itself. Like, we're not mothers, we're not girls, we're not women, we're lesbians. And I think about that. And then also currently there's like this real revival of butch femme culture, and I would say I am very much a part of that. But like, I think
you're
like,
definitely butch femme.
this
Totes, girl.
desire to, like, for me to engage in a really kind of like traditional butch femme dynamic that like lesbian feminists really did not like, right? Like, I want someone who's going to hold open my doors and like drive me around, and I want someone who doesn't, is like auntie, or like isn't, people are like, is it a boy or a girl? You know what I mean? Like, I think like there's something, this type of desire for like the libidinal desire, as you say, of being like a femme lesbian, is so intrinsic to my feminist identity. And yet I do run a book club called Lesbian Feminist Book Club, because I think there is a lot there in the lesbian feminist movement and understanding of identity and politics, that even though they were really antagonistic towards like butches and femmes, and were often quite transphobic or regressive and kind of within the line of the enemy feminists that you identify, there's also so much there that I think is so beautiful and so interesting to engage with, and which is why, even though these things may seem like contradictory, or historically has been, they've pushed each other out of different spaces, lesbian feminists and butch femmes, I still try to like bring these things together in like the work that I do and the way that I think. So yeah, I'm interested in sort of the ways that like contradictions and critically engaging with thinkers and feminists and past movements as these current things that now exist in a contemporary context. I'm interested in like how you engage with that, and how you want to engage with that moving forward with your work.
I think what you just said really quite generatively sort of sums up the ethos that I too am really striving for. I mean, rejecting a sort of purity as much as possible in terms of the impulse to purify, right? If I was doing that with regard to feminism, I would be simply repeating the purgative logics of the enemy archetypes that I'm trying to critique, but also knowing how to collectively draw lines and hold them, while being compassionate, not matricidal, but comradely vis-a-vis people who have traveled before us, who I think that the sort of the metaphor of like foremothers and sort of transgenerational traffic always being about mothers and daughters is sort of I don't know, I understand very well and have articulated a lot how, it is sad sometimes when feminists want to kind of, reject or override or dismiss or repudiate the thought of their mothers, if we're going to put it that way, but I also think a different way of approaching this, and it's in the same ethos really, is to say, time is sticky and circular and complicated, and we don't need to reproduce these strangely conservative kinship models for how we relate to the writings of the dead. Like, I actually think I'm often time traveling more than that would suggest, and disagreeing fiercely, not because I think of someone as my mother who I need to obliterate, but because I want to be in the room with this comrade and win a fight with them. I don't know if that resonates with what you're saying. I'm just talking about being able to take certain insights while rejecting strongly others, the way that politics works, right? It's an ongoing story. Nothing is finished, nothing is over. That's the beauty of it, in a sense, when it comes to tragic and dispiriting and nihilism-inducing times like this. That's the thing we can hold on to, right? There are always threads that we can pick up and light the end of, as though it was, a fuse. What kinds of explosions might occur down the line,
For sure.
I am so edified and educated and happy to have been in conversation with you. I think the sorts of things that you've just brought us to are actually a perfect pausing place.
I am so happy to have been in conversation with you. This is like, these are the Sophieisms that we love.
Have me on again. So
yes, for sure.
Discuss all the million things we didn't get to.
Yes, there's so much to get into. Thank you so much for talking with me. I really appreciate.
I'm gonna say that next time someone interviews me, I'm gonna be like, "It was my great pleasure to be in conversation with you." All right, well, I guess that's the end of our Sophie video for tonight. It wasn't our typical Sophie stream. We did definitely get some good clips. I've got to decide how I want to handle the clip situation, because the thing of it is like, okay, it's not that I don't think the clips we got of Sophie tonight talking about how sex trafficking is preferable to being in the nuclear family. It's not like I don't think those are important. I do think they're important. I want to think about how that information is presented to an audience, because I also feel like it's kind of complicated for people who don't know what they're listening to. So I have to think about that. Also, I'm really upset that Sophie has put me in this situation. I don't want to be in this situation. And if Sophie just hadn't said this crazy shit on the internet, then I wouldn't be in this situation. Yeah, see, the conservatives are going to misconstrue it. See, here's what's going to happen is, like, I do pride myself on having some level of intellectual honesty and integrity. And I know exactly what's going to happen when I release this. And then I want to make sure that I am doing my due diligence to present it in an intellectually honest way. But I know exactly what's going to happen is it's not going to be taken in an intellectually honest way, because the people on our side are retards. Why defend it after that? Because the truth fucking matters. The truth fucking matters. We don't start lying about people and presenting falsehoods in response to hearing something we don't like. That would make us no better than the conservative retards on Twitter. The truth matters. Intellectual integrity matters. We don't own the libs just because it's convenient for us and would get clout on the internet. The priority here is telling the truth above all else, not engaging in clickbait garbage bullshit. So I got to think about that. I don't know exactly what I'm going to do yet. I'm going to think about it. But I appreciate everyone coming out for Socialism Saturday. Again, guys, if you want to support the work I'm doing, the very best place to do that is by heading over to my Substack. That is Karlyn, Karlyn, .substack.com. While you're over there, you can sign up for a membership of $8 a month, $80 a year, and that keeps me in business because I'm 100% funded by people like you. You get updates, you get clips, You get all sorts of great stuff. When you become a supporter, you get access to supporter perks, like access to my supporter Discord, where we do movie nights. We'll be watching the original Alien tomorrow at 8 p.m. in my supporter Discord. MacB also has another monster movie, old school monster movie, like in the spirit of Godzilla with some sort of Japanese name that I can't pronounce. He's showing that on Monday at 9 p.m. And so you'll get access to that when you become a supporter over on the Substack. As a reminder, I do not stream on Sundays, although maybe I will. I don't know. I'm not planning on streaming tomorrow as of right now. Hey, thanks, Ren, and I appreciate you as always. So I will usually take Sundays off unless something major happens. I'm currently planning on taking Sunday off because I am tired AF. It's been a long week and I got a lot of stuff I need to do. And so I'm going to go do that. But I will see you guys on Monday, and thanks for hanging out with me, and thank you to everyone who's supporting my work. I really do appreciate it. And I'll see you on Monday at 5 p.m. And that's it, guys. Take care. We'll see you soon. Bye.
How are you feeling? How long have you been here?
3 months, May 17th.
And what brought you?
That's difficult to answer.
Would you give me some idea?
I am not completely like other people.
What do you mean by that?
People dislike me because I am not completely like them. I am trying to do with my life something which few people try to do, and this influences my thinking and consequently my action.
What is it you're trying to do with your life?
Play the piano for people.
I'm not clear. How is it that playing the piano for people has eventually resulted in your being here in the hospital?
That's difficult to answer.